Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. We're going to be talking about the rising crisis in Europe with the Russian military pressure on Ukraine. And one of the things I want to touch on is whether Russia is bluffing with all the communist bloc. Well, we're not supposed to say there's a communist bloc, but they're the same countries. All the Marxist Leninist regimes in the world are supporting Russia. Russia's supporting them, and it looks like a coordinated effort to me. And I think they're going to use nuclear weapons at some point in this. And I had a conversation with Ben Hodges on Thursday, and he told me there's zero chance that Russia will use nuclear weapons to shoot its way out of this conflict. So I'm interested in my friend in Germany, Alex Benesch. What do you say about this, Alex?
Well, it's like it seems like a mix of wishful thinking. We all like to feel that we're in control and we have it all figured out. I think people have been sleeping a lot better for the last generations, thinking that. Now others, they have chosen not to believe that. A few people who actually know what they're doing, and then of course you had the average Joe who thought, man, it could all end tomorrow. We could all be incinerated and not even be alive long enough to realize it. We're just going to be incinerated in your sleep, or you're at work. And then you hear something on the emergency radio frequency or something on television that there's incoming missiles, and you have 5 minutes or less to get to a basement, and you're never going to leave that basement. Because there's no food, water there, and the fallout will get you. So some people have used this to live a hedonistic life, crazy life. Don't plan ahead. Don't just a lot of people have ruined their lives for nothing. And then of course there's this hyper, let's say an exaggerated prepper phenomenon when people are so focused on one outcome that they not properly plan for less dramatic outcomes. I mean, there's different types. We talked about this on a specific episode in a previous episode. Not every nuclear war is the same. It's not just everybody's dead, nobody's alive anymore. There's so many different kinds
Well, World
of
War
nuclear
II was
wars.
a nuclear war. Nuclear weapons were used in World War II, and we're
Yeah,
not all dead,
yeah.
right?
So it's like you gotta plan ahead, and it's not just you can't just think it's never gonna happen, and you cannot think it's gonna happen, and I can't do anything about it. No planning makes any sense because we're all gonna die. You have to go at this in a very professional way. And when somebody like somebody from military says he's not worried about this, we have to realize that these military people, they are fed a constant stream of information. They're supposed to function within that stream of information, and they may not be privy to, let's say, the biggest secrets that the Russians have, because it's a tough nut to crack. We know how few high-ranking sources the West has ever had in high places in Russia, and each and every one was betrayed by a traitor on the Western side. The Aldrich Ameses and the Robert Hansons, and they sold out
Oh yeah.
one super source after another, and they got a bonus payment package for that.
And I
Um,
think in a lot of cases, the super sources were turned and were feeding false information. So you can't tell the line
yeah,
when the false information was fed and when the genuine.
or maybe
You
the
got the
super source.
controversies over
Yeah,
Top Hat and Fedora, two of
ex-
the sources, yeah,
exactly, and
that
maybe the
were
super
that were
source
compromised.
was like Hodges, not exactly involved in the most secret planning, the nuclear planning, because the Russians, they like to keep things separate. They like to keep things compartmented, and we talked about this on a previous episode. They have like this weird hierarchy of these long-term KGB families, as they even lie about their backgrounds and who their parents were, and who was
Yeah,
really from a
like
KGB
maybe even
family.
Putin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so these fifth directorate KGB people, that's like a multi-generational thing, and so there's levels that not even a Soviet or Russian general was really
Well,
privy
not
to.
even experts on the Soviet Union
Yeah,
agree or
and we know
understand.
about
In a lot of cases, they're
we know
wrong.
about the historic triangular system of the party people, the military people, and the KGB people, and how
KGB, yeah, the
it
Iron
all changed.
Triangle.
It changed after 1991. The intelligence people had the upper hand, which is interesting because most people think intelligence spying is just an addendum. Maybe Hodges thinks that way. Maybe he thinks that
No,
spying
I don't
is
think he. I don't think he does. Let me yeah, to be fair to him, let me tell you his argument why he thought they wouldn't use nuclear weapons. He said that during the Cold War in the 1980s, the Russians had special nuclear equipment. I mean, equipment with the troops and the training to deal with fallout. To deal with fallout from, of
right.
course, tactical nukes are dirty, by the way. Tactical nukes are fission, so they're dirty. You had a nuclear minefield, by the way, in the middle of your country, in Germany, right along the line, right in front of the Fulda Gap. You had tactical nuclear minefields that NATO had laid, and this was
Iran had
actually a
it
secret.
too. They
Nuclear
nuclear mined
minefields?
parts of Iran too.
No kidding. Um, but anyway, and I don't know, as a German, did anybody in Germany, did you ever hear about these nuclear minefields that were protecting West Germany?
Um, there's different things I got into over the last 10 to 20 years because there's so many things. They had a system of bunkers on the German borders. They had
Hmm.
supercomputers, or what at the time was considered a supercomputer, in each of those bunkers because they had to have this processing power to plan for a vast multi-million army force to coordinate everything. And they had this plan of one of the plans that leaked eventually. They would nuke a few places in Western Germany. They would nuke a few places, and then they would send in the Czech troops through the contaminated area. So they had like the system where they would nuke something and not tell really the Czech troops, or say, well,
Hmm.
your thin coats or paper aluminum foil, things that we give you that will
Or
protect
the
you from
armor of the
everything.
tanks, just to basically button up inside the tank or the APC and
Yeah.
you're safe, right?
So we're gonna send you in because these troops were considered the most expendable, and if they die, then they die, and then they would send in the other
Because, by
forces.
the way, they didn't want those troops behind the Soviet troops that
Yeah,
might revolt. They want to
and then
send in the allies in
yeah,
first.
and then they had
Yeah.
this other thing that was supposed to be like, a nuclear battlefield. I'm not so much aware of the mining thing, which is really interesting. I was aware of
Yeah.
this kind of nuclear exchange on German soil because if if enough of the industry survives, if it's placed strategically, there might still be something to gain from it for the Russians. Some loot, the the stuff that the Russians need, that they want. And also there's been on the back burner recently, but more in the forefront now. I
Hmm.
think that there's supposed to be stockpiles of depleted uranium ammunition for tanks, because a
Hmm.
lot of these tanks here, the Leopard ones, the Leopard 2s, and others, a lot of them, the barrels are not big enough to penetrate certain armor. But if you
Right.
have rounds that have depleted uranium, you can
Yeah.
penetrate the other
Yeah. Because from the
tank's armor.
side, from the side, the Soviet tanks are very tough in
Yeah,
their armor. They're hard
because
to hit.
they have
Yeah.
like the lesser option would be tank ammo, penetrating ammo that has a core of we call it Wolfram carbide. I don't know what I think it's a tungsten. Is that tungsten carb? What do you say, tungsten carbide? I'm not exactly sure what the correct translation would
I'm
be,
not sure either.
but it's
Tungsten,
it's
though
something.
most ammunition has tungsten in it. I
It's
do know
so
that. They use
dense.
tungsten.
It's supposed to be so dense. It's almost closer to the density of pure gold. It's very heavy, so it has that momentum. But if
Right.
all else
That's
fails,
why they use uranium in the
yeah,
warheads to make it
they
dense.
would eventually they
Yeah.
would use depleted uranium rounds, if not actual exploding certain
Right.
artillery rounds, because you can also have artillery rounds that will detonate like any regular nuclear bomb. So
The reason why the Russians, I should just mention this, people say, well, what these Russian tanks, we used the depleted uranium rounds on Saddam Hussein's tanks, and he had largely T-62s and T-55s, I think were the tanks that he was using. Maybe he had some T-72s. And it's a standard heavy tank design that the Russians had. They kept upgrading it. But the reason why in Ukraine these handheld anti-tank weapons, this anti-tank missile,
the
goes straight
javelin,
down onto the top of the tank, right where there's the very top of the turret. It's not armored. It's not heavily armored because nobody's going to be firing down on you and hitting the top of the tank. You're going to be firing on the side. So this thing it basically, and then they call them a lollipops. The Ukrainians call them, because when you do that, it blows the turret right off the tank and it twirls around in the air like a lollipop flying in the air and then lands somewhere. And that's what they were doing to the Russian tanks. So they found this vulnerability in the Russian tanks because they can make a missile go with all
yeah.
this technology now we have.
There's
In the Cold War in the 70s and the 80s, they couldn't do that. So a
mm,
direct tank round fired from another tank, it has to have this heavy thing to get through
yeah.
it. Yeah,
And
that's correct.
eventually, multiple countries, they stopped doing a lot of these traditional nuclear weapons testing. So either you detonate it on a surface or above a surface,
Yeah.
or you do an underground test. Then they had the supercomputers where they could simulate what the effect of the explosion would be. And then there was the next thing, which was kind of hidden inside a program that was sometimes mentioned as a green program, supposedly about
Great.
getting closer to fusion, some type of fusion energy. So at some point they want to make electricity for cheap with a groundbreaking, fission type
Yeah,
system.
they've been working on cold
But
fusion and
but
others. Yeah.
the latest breakthrough, when that was announced in the media, they focused on the green energy thing.
When was it announced in the media?
This
When?
must have been about 2 years ago. I did a story. I think
Oh, really?
I'm not
Uh-huh.
sure if it's just on German or you can find it on the English thing. But everybody can Google it. It was announced as green energy, but then if you read closer and you actually go to the website of it's a U.S. laboratory, you actually get to know that the energy production is far off. They can actually use it now to make exotic nuclear type bombs and test it without an actual detonation. So they can have a specific reaction, and then they can experiment. They can do
These would be
add.
implosion devices, fusion devices,
I'm not I'm not even close to
precision versus
understanding the
fusion.
physics
Okay,
of it, but they
all right.
explain it for dummies, and they said
But they
that
said they said it's thermonuclear. They said it's fusion.
yeah, they say basically it's like a cooking
Wow.
laboratory where you can add things, like spice it up, add a few more ingredients, and see what it does. Actually have a test and say, okay, this gives us, let's say, a new option. Let's say we can have a big blast, but the smallest amount of radiation possible. Or they're dreaming about
Yeah.
something that has
Well, yes, a
almost,
tactical fusion warhead.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you've heard of this mercury antimony oxide, red mercury. Have you heard of that?
Yeah,
Of
there's some
course.
stuff
Is
that's
that what you're talking about? Yeah.
they explain it as if you could have a comparable blast, but it's not. You don't have the radiation. You don't have the moral issue resolved with the radiation, the
You don't have
fallout, the
any
civilians.
environmental
You can just
contamination. Yeah.
destroy. You can just destroy a target,
Destroy the target. Yeah.
and you can say this is not a regular nuclear weapon. It's just a big blast, so nobody can really attack us for violating this that, and the other. So they have
Right.
a
Right.
testing method that
Is
is
Germany
faster and
developing
cheaper.
this?
Yeah, officially no, but the Germans are so integrated with the Americans when it comes to these traditional corporations. They can do these type of things. I mean, it's been legendary how the Soviets would accuse the West Germans of being involved in biological weapons research, while the Germans could always say, we're just researching diseases and countermeasures, and we share some
Right.
information with our allies, and what they do with it, we don't know. I would say, I would guess, absolutely yes. The leading companies here, facilities, they stopped doing. I mean, they were forced to stop making products for the nuclear power plants and improving nuclear power plants,
Hmm.
but they can do other things, right? They have the
Hmm.
equipment, they have the manpower, and so they
Are
can
these
do
companies
things.
do any of these companies work with the Japanese? Do you
Um,
know? Are there ties?
Traditionally, yes. Traditionally, yes.
Oh gosh,
They
that's very interesting.
There's always like this flurry of things. I mean, we talked about this, I think, when it came to how the Russians try to source their parts, and it's baffling how one thing is made of so many components, and this component is Japan, this is Germany, this is Britain, and this component has to be made from components and machines that are made from
Oh yes.
components.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
baffling. It's mind blowing, and so um, it's yeah. I mean, it's an engineering type war, and engineering can get you around certain um, around certain legal restrictions. When you say it's a fusion type bomb, it's not a nuclear bomb. It's not like the old stuff. Or you
And
can
we're
say
talking about something that has like what, a 1 kiloton, 10 kiloton range blast effect.
small, yeah, smaller. Smaller. It's still bigger than any conventional, or it's bigger. Much. It's still significantly
It's
more than
it's a
conventional bombs.
micronuclear weapon. I mean, fuel air bombs, vacuum bombs, also known as, they can have this tactical nuclear style shock wave that can
Yeah,
destroy things within a radius. This is the Russians supposedly were developing in the late 90s. And this is something I was told by a well-placed American
yeah,
watching the war in the Second Chechen War. The Russians were using experimental, you know, vacuum bomb technology in Iskander missiles, and they were hitting targets that our DPS satellites were saying that this is a nuclear detonation.
yeah,
And then they look at it and go, no, no radiation. That has to be a vacuum bomb, and that they had intelligence that the Russians and Chinese were working on this together. Uh,
yeah,
Basically, the problem with the fuel air bomb, the vacuum bombs, is that they're huge. They're really big devices. You shove it out of the back of a transporter, you drop it from a heavy bomber because it's so darn big. But they were making the components smaller so the bomb could be smaller. And of course, still in Ukraine, they're dropping those things out of the back of transports. But I was talking to Lee Wheelbarger about this. Wheelbarger was close to my other source. He's a former Pentagon contractor, and he was backing up my other source, saying, "Yeah, the Russians have made them smaller." And he showed me the updated version of the Katyusha rocket. The Stalin's organs. This is a giant truck with a bunch of
yeah.
a giant rocket
Stalin
launcher
Orgel.
truck, the Stalin's organs, right? And because it made the sound like an organ, right? I guess that's what he was telling me. I'd never understood the term before. I'd read it about it, but I never understood
Well,
where it
it's like
came from.
organ
But
pipes, right? It looks like
organ pipes, yeah,
organ pipes.
that's right. It looks like a giant organ pipes, and they're really the pipes are firing the rockets. And he said that the warheads on these Russian rocket units were vacuum bomb warheads. And I said, "You got to be kidding me. The number of these if you have a Stalin's organ with that much firepower going for a target, you could wipe out a whole section of front. You could basically devastate a brigade, even
Hmm.
if it's dug in, because these
Hmm.
things produce a shock wave that kills people inside vehicles, kills people inside bunkers without even destroying the bunkers. Why? Because I was told the shock waves from these things can be calibrated so that the shock wave will pass through the armor of the tank, and it will affect the internal organs of the people inside the tank and deliver a fatal injuries
Yeah.
to the people inside the bunker of the tank. Incredibly, I mean, I was told that in 1999 they were working together with the Chinese to develop a grenade, a rifle fired grenade that was a fuel air bomb that had the fire, that had basically the blast capacity of a 155 millimeter howitzer. Of course, rifle fired grenade can't go as far as a howitzer. You got an
Mm,
infantryman
mm.
sitting in a bunch of rubble trying to take out a bunch of people defending a building. Maybe it's a giant cement building in the middle of a city. You just fire one of those things in there. You got to make sure it's far enough away from you the shock wave doesn't kill you. And you hit that building and it'll knock down, if it's calibrated right, a three,
Yeah.
four, 5 story building with
Yeah,
a
we
rifle
heard these.
fired grenade.
Yeah, we're hearing these rumblings that that car manufacturers, I mean, they announce it every now and then. They say, well, Porsche may restart making weaponry or weapons related products. Volkswagen,
Yes,
maybe
you
even
mentioned that last week.
Mercedes,
Yep.
BMW. I mean, most people don't even remember how many military items or military goods had BMW engines in them, or
Mm.
Rolls-Royce engine, Air Force products, planes, others,
Tanks, self-propelled
yeah,
artillery. Yes.
BMW engines, Rolls-Royce engines, and uh, Porsche, the family, Porsche family, the products that they built or they had planned, and it's like they all resorted back to making cars. But they can also flip back to making military goods. And I mean, people have been buying less cars or leasing less new cars, but the facilities are there. The workforce is there. There's rumblings that people are told, don't fire your workforce, don't reduce. The economy is gonna flip when war production ramps up. There's rumblings that official announcements would be made about we call it a state of geopolitical tension. That's not the same as we're at war, but it's kind of halfway there, or 2/3 along the way. And it gives the government new opportunities, and when the economy picks up, usually people will start voting, or more people will vote again for these traditional parties that are very pro-America, the CDU party, and even the FDP party, the market libertarians. That party's been around forever. These parties have been rebuilt or restarted or started after World War II by the Allied forces. There's a long
Mhm.
history, also a long intelligence history, which we understand better and better as time goes by. So usually when there's like a state of geopolitical, real, actual tension, people have and the jobs are coming back and the economy picks up, people tend to be more conservative. They're not in an experimental mood, and they will remember that, okay, it was this party that got us through the Cold War. It was this party that was aligned with the Americans, the French, the Brits, etc. And you can play this up, this will be, of course, and we talked about this, interpreted by the Russians in different ways for different target audiences. They will say, see, we told you Europe is full of Nazis. Everybody's, Nazi in Europe, and they're doing it again. They want to attack Mother Russia. But nobody has any interest here in mobilizing forces and pushing them really far east. Nobody's interested in that. No,
No,
I mean,
yeah, it's a total myth that
the
the Russians have
population,
promoted. Yeah.
the population, even military personnel, everybody has zero interest in, um, invading Mother Russia and taking any stupid risks. It's just about digging in and then keep calm and carry on, really.
Because Europe has become a shopping mall like America. People want to live a decent life. They want to have goods and services. They want to use the technology to live longer and to enjoy more things. In Russia, the state controls and the state disposes of your life. You're going to the front. You're going to be cannon fodder, and we'll use nuclear weapons. We're going to dominate.
Yeah, yeah. It's like,
You know.
I mean, my current car, or my new car, um, my new car is an Audi Q6 e-tron. And when you're sitting inside this thing, you can sort of feel the history that goes into these very traditional German companies, right? I mean, it's like it's
Mhm.
still there. There's different flavors. You know, you sit in a Mercedes, or you sit in a BMW, or you sit in an Audi or a Volkswagen. You can still feel this. I mean, let's be real. If I mean, anybody who still remembers the Volkswagen Beetle, the original Volkswagen Beetle, it's considered like a hippie car now, or people at the time thought it was like a hip car, a hippie car. This
Mhm.
was
Right.
originally a Nazi design, had a completely different name. They try to call it the Kraft durch Freude wagon, means power through happiness car. Now, of course, in Nazi lingo, that's very grim. And they had planned to make this car on a grander scale, and people would be able to afford it, but they could never do it like the
And then they can
Americans.
drive down to Crimea to enjoy the beaches that
Right.
had been conquered in the war. Yeah.
But they could never do it like the Americans. Ford, GM, they could produce cars on scale, better cars than the Nazis could come up with, and the Americans could sell them at a profit, which the Nazis could not. They figured they would lose that amount of Reichsmark per car sold, but they wanted that. They still wanted to market it, and it's just like today with the Chinese cars. They literally stole the designs from Volkswagen. They had these digital break-ins, stealing all the data, not having to do our research and development themselves, saving billions and billions and tens of billions of euros. And now they want to flood us with these Chinese cars that are cheaper than the competition. But despite all the the civilian car culture and the glitz and whatnot, I mean, you sit in a German car and you understand where they come from, and it's just when you see the precision, when you see kind of the heritage that's still going on, because let's face it, a lot of these engineers, they're in their 50s and 60s, and they've been trained by people who are now like 80 years old, or more like 90
Or
years old.
90. Yeah.
It's a generational thing, right? You get into this, you get trained by the older people, and then you adopt their style. And the Russians are gonna freak, because the Russians could defend themselves because of their espionage in World War II, but technology wise, if things hadn't been sabotaged so much, the tank designs, in the Nazi era, there was a lot of sabotage going on, coming from Bormann telling Hitler, "No, we need to make this tank bigger," and completely false choice. Or we need to focus on this plane should be a bomber, not a jet
Well,
hunter
it
plane.
was yeah, they that's the reason why the Me-262 was late. They
Oh
were
God,
Hitler
yeah.
said, "Make it into a fighter bomber," and
They
then
could have
it delayed
defended.
it here.
They estimates now say Germany could have completely defended its airspace with a minimal number of these new fast jet
Yeah,
fighters.
500 Me-262s would have stopped the Normandy
Long range.
invasion.
They never bothered. The Nazis. Many people don't know that the Nazis had never really bothered to come up with or build a strategic long range bomber force, bomber airplane
Right.
force. They could have destroyed the Russian production, Moscow area, St. Petersburg area production. They could have strategically bombed those facilities. If the Germans hadn't been hampered by espionage, and that's still a problem today,
Yeah.
things could have been completely different, and that's what the
And
Russians are
the
afraid
Nazi
of.
regime was penetrated by all kinds of communist Soviet
Yeah,
agents.
and so I'm glad. I mean, people have been talking about this even before Snowden, and especially after Snowden. Well, the Americans, they can theoretically break into German systems and see what they're working on. Yeah, thank God they can, because the Russians probably are in those systems.
Oh,
They
sure.
can steal the plans, but they can make it on scale. But we're lucky that the Americans can see or know
Well,
what
this is the
we have.
question about these new bombs. No, anyway, so going back to General Ben Hodges and whether or not the Russians have these capacities, we've got the Stalin's organs with the vacuum, if Wheelbarger is right, with the vacuum warheads. We've got this question, which really I am, want to try to resolve. Of course, we probably can't resolve it here, but it's to put in people's heads to think about. Um, is General Hodges is certain that Russia's bluffing, that the only thing they're doing is their mobilization, their preparations to mobilize next year. A 24/7 around the clock, mobilize anybody anytime next year, where they could put, they could mobilize 2 million men next year, as opposed to just a few 100,000 as they've been mobilizing. That their industries are much more capable of they've gone to a full war economy. They can build thousands of tanks now, thousands of new. There's some data coming out saying that they can build T-90 tanks in a multiple of 1,000 numbers. These are not the tanks they've been using in the war in Ukraine. They've been using the old Cold War tanks, the T-72s, the T-80s, and whatnot. And then there's the question of the personnel they're using. And General Hodges himself said something shocking. He said, well, the number one name of the Russian soldiers dying in Ukraine is Muhammad.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, we know that there's a large Muslim population in Russia, but they're not a
Very large.
majority of Russians,
Yeah,
So how
but
come the majority of the casualties, their name is Muhammad?
yeah, I've heard some calculations that would, I mean, if things continue the way they have been going in Russia, a more significant portion of the Russian military would be Muslim in the year 2040 or 30 or
Oh yeah,
50.
they're much more Muslimized than Europe
I'm
is,
I'm
for
really
sure.
concerned about I'm really concerned about proxy countries proxy countries being used to initiate or have a sort of nuclear war, because then the Russians could say, we didn't do that, we didn't fire those rockets,
Right.
North
Yeah.
Korea did, Venezuela did, this African country did, Iran did.
Iran did. Yeah.
Talk to them. We're not we didn't tell them what to do. Those are
Right.
sovereign countries, even though we've
Yeah.
controlled them
This is
for
this is why
generations. But
Russian proliferation. I'll repeat for those who haven't followed our broadcast from the beginning. I'll repeat a story I had in April of when I was at the briefing when the top Marine general in Korea came to Texas A&M, the George Bush Center, to give a briefing uh, that North Korea had two nuclear weapons. This was in April of 2001. There was a simultaneous briefing at the Pentagon that same day. And the world was this was the first moment the world knew, or we were told, that North Korea was a nuclear power. And I actually sat next to the Marine Corps general at dinner because I wanted to pick his brain that evening. But and I had this after this announcement. I was, of course, wanted to ask former Defense Secretary under Clinton a question, and there was the South Korean ambassador to Russia there, who I also was talking to, and this guy from the International Atomic Energy Agency, a Greek national, came up to former Defense Secretary Perry, and had this weird question, and he asked Perry. There are power lines going between the North Korean nuclear project and Pyongyang. Do they carry power from Pyongyang into the project or from the project into Pyongyang? And Secretary Perry was like, oh, gee, I never thought of that. I don't know. I will go and I will check. And this guy had this look of satisfaction on his face. This Greek guy, he had this sort of smile, and he scurried away. And I scurried after him. I went and ran after him. I caught up with him halfway down the hall. And I said, hey, you knew the answer to that question that you asked Defense Secretary Perry. And he turned around and he said, yeah, I did. And I said, so what's the answer? And he said, oh, the North Koreans are very clever people. There is no power in those lines. They're dummies. So why would you have dummy power lines? I was thinking to myself, running, and I thought, okay, so the North Koreans didn't develop their own nuclear power. The whole thing is a dummy. If the lines are a dummy, the whole project is a dummy.
oh, and
And I said,
there was
So
similar story. Oh God, yeah.
right. And so I said to him, I said, so the Chinese gave them the bomb and the project is just a cover, the supposed North Korean weapons development is just a cover for the Chinese giving them the bomb. And he shook his head no. And I said, the Russians gave it to them? And
Yeah,
then
that was
he like looked at me with a smile. He said, "Oh, the North Koreans are very clever people." And then, of course, I found out later from Peter Vincent Pry and about the testimony before Congress that the Soviet nuclear weapons scientists had gone to North Korea and started that project there in North Korea. And I have come to understand that the North Korean nuclear weapons testing facilities and their program is just a way for Russia to test
mask.
nuclear weapons,
Yeah,
despite the ban since the Cold War where they're not supposed to. So they're just using the North Korean program is theirs. They're testing and developing Russian nuclear warheads there,
yeah.
and they're giving for the privilege they're giving. Now, I guess North Korea has more than 30 nuclear warheads, supposedly. We don't know the exact number. But basically, that Greek from the International Atomic Energy Agency basically gave me real interesting inside dope. And so the same thing I think is with Iran. They're
There was the
proliferating.
story. There was the story. I remember this thing when there was a guy who worked in Iran. He was sort of an expert on a power grid system, and he was on a career trajectory, worked his butt off, and then some regime guy sidelined him, took his ideas, took his trajectory away from him, totally sidelined him, and that's when this Iranian power grid expert, that's when he started to contact the CIA or a proxy of the CIA, and he started to give not just information he already had, vacationing or doing some business trip in a neutral country, then meeting with the CIA. But he was also saying, I can get more information. I can go on a motorcycle in Iran and I can go from place to place. I have a cover story. If they stop me, I seem totally legit. And I can map for you the power grid system, the power grid system that the Iranians are using for the nuclear weapons program. So the CIA said, well, that sounds terrific. Please do. And so he was risking his butt going around with his motorcycle all over Iran, and he had this elaborate map of all where the power lines are going. Strategic targets, of course. If you can hit the power line, they can work in those nuclear facilities. But he was starting to get a bit... He felt weird that his information wasn't so well received, and he didn't feel prioritized. And he was, of course, talking to the CIA. Please get me and my family out when we have delivered everything we can. We need the visa, and we know there's very few citizenships that the CIA can actually make happen, American citizenships. It's reserved for very special sources that you can get them out, give them a U.S. citizenship and their family U.S. citizenship. So he felt something was off. And then he was given a digital contact type system that wasn't well developed. It was not a prime system for sources. I mean, even the prime system got busted later in China. That's a whole nother story. But he was given a lesser system, kind of like
Oh
a
boy.
stupid looking soccer website. It was a phony website that looks like a regular fan made soccer website or some sort. You would click on a search field, and then you had to type in a certain code word or a phrase, and then it would open a chat window. So you can chat or send a chat message to your contacts at the CIA. But then it turned out that a lot of these fake websites were hosted at the same place on the same servers, and if one guy gets busted with a website like this, all of these websites are compromised because they're hosted in the same place, close IP range. So it wasn't a good system. So he got arrested, he got busted, he was in a horrific prison for 10 years, and he never heard again from the CIA. So he always wondered what was off, and it could be that maybe higher up in the U.S. system, maybe they already knew that the Russians were really the suppliers for Iran, and the Iran's own system was not really that much of a priority. It was more like a mask. It was for show. All the song and dance that the Iranians have been doing on behalf of Russia, developing stuff, enriching uranium, then saying we won't go over to 60%. Oh, we did go over 60%. Inspectors found something that's even in the 90% range. Blah blah blah. Sanctions. Blah blah blah. All that smokescreen. When in fact Russia can just be a supplier and have the PAL system, like the security system that's built into these warheads and the missiles, where you need the codes. You need a specific. There's multiple security systems, so only the
PAL is
person.
permissive action
Yeah,
link, and it's a code
exactly.
system
Where
for
where you
protecting.
want to
Yeah,
prevent the unauthorized usage of a nuclear weapon, and there's so many
right.
systems of it. It's not like just there were in the past some primitive systems, but now they have like all these sensors, and if it's not if it's not fired in the correct way, and the bomb knows it's not going up in the air, it's not going down, something's off, this was not the programmed codes, something isn't 100% right, the bomb will not detonate. So the
That's
Russians
right.
can make sure that it things hit when it's supposed to hit.
Right.
So let's say the bombs will come from Venezuela, the bombs will come from Iran, the
Right.
bombs will come from some North Korea, some African state, or some fake
Or a
stupid
terrorist group.
overthrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, or some stupid stage thing where there's like a coup in a country, and there's this group, and they say, now we rule this thing, and we want to fight the Satan America and this evil American Anglo imperial system, and then they have nuclear missiles, and it's all Russian.
Yeah, this is a way to launch a nuclear war against the West. And this is something Colonel Stanislav Lunev, the late Colonel Stanislav Lunev, was a GRU defector. He was familiar with Soviet and Russian Federation plans. He was involved at the beginning of the Yeltsin regime with the military planning and their work with China. He spoke Mandarin. But he told me, I asked him, I said, in one conversation, I said, I've read the Soviet military doctrines and literature, and I understand that in principle you can launch a surprise nuclear attack, um, but and that you can be as creative as you want. But I don't understand how you do it without getting a devastating retaliation from the West. And he said, if you ever hear that America is attacked by Arab terrorists with nuclear weapons attacking American cities, smuggling them into the U.S. Don't believe it, because it will be Spetsnaz. It will be my people. It will be the Russians. And that was really striking because Viktor Suvorov, another GRU officer who defected, I think in 79, his pen name is Viktor Suvorov. His real name was Vladimir Rezin. He's written extensively about this, but he said basically the same thing in a book called Spetsnaz, in a chapter called Spetsnaz's First World War, saying that they would use terrorist organizations, not obviously connected to Moscow, to launch what he calls gray terror during a period called the Overture. Before a nuclear war, you have these terrorists absorbing all the security, does this sound familiar, and military attention of the West for some period before you launch World War III. So the West is diverted away from looking at what Russia's doing, and they're basically hunting these terrorists who are threatening to
Mm.
come up with nuclear weapons
Yeah, and
to
also
hit
I mean
American
the
cities. And of course, we had this story that bin Laden had stolen nukes from the Soviet nuclear arsenal, right? This was back in 2001. This rumor had gotten started and was actually repeated in testimony before
and
Congress.
and also they had this thing about the what people used to refer to as Al Qaeda, which is a flurry of crazy many groups, but they in essence, there was this thing about Al Qaeda and their contacts all over in Pakistan and other places. they have laboratories, they have access to all kinds of weird bats that are flying around in those areas in the world, special bats, and special, and also other places they have camels, specific camels that have specific diseases. If you modify them, they can be super deadly. And there was always this thing in the air about biological warfare, biowarfare mixed with other types of warfare. I mean, people have to realize it takes a few nuclear weapons, just a few nuclear weapons that hit, let's say, the United States, plus in addition a bit of old school basic smallpox, and life changes significantly for everybody.
Yeah.
It So first change happens within minutes. You know, when the rockets start flying, they hit within a few minutes. That's a big change immediately. And then when somebody decides to add a bit of smallpox in different places of the United States, then you will hear the first reports of, okay, people are getting sick. Then it's more people are getting sick, and then it says, do not leave your home. And people, and then there's cyber attacks mixed in, attacks on infrastructures. There is no power, you don't have any means of communication. Then you have to go out because you have to find food, you want to find your family, and you want to find water, and blah blah blah. So you're doing the exact wrong thing in terms of a biological quarantine. It's not rocket science, or it's not something that's a fantastic, far out weird scenario. It's just a few rockets, a bit of smallpox, and a few cyber attacks, and there you go. The world changes. Everything changes. So let's apply all
We
this.
have a Netflix movie, by the way, and I watched it last night
Oh
called
yeah, I
House of
haven't seen
Dynamite.
that. What is this about?
I well, it's again, it's disappointing because it's politically motivated and it contains disinformation about nuclear war. It's a very realistic staging. It's got three parts. It shows from the point of view of a local tracking center of some kind working for the National Security Agency, or no, rather, I think the White House in the Chicago area. And this lady goes to work, and she's like works with with the White House on following tracking missiles and stuff. And then they've got I think it might be the Great Lakes Naval Center because it's got an admiral in charge, and they show, a third of the movie is about how they start tracking a nuclear missile coming from the Western Pacific near Kamchatka, and they're not sure who's launched it because the DPS satellite was blinded. So this thing is coming towards the United States. They don't quite realize its trajectory at first, but then they realize it is. So then you've got the missile center in Alaska where we've got our interceptor launchers, and they launch two interceptors. One fails on launch and the other fails to hit the target, right? So you've got this all tracked, and then you go to the next level. You go to the Secretary of Defense and the commander of the Stratcom commander, how they're dealing with it, and of course it's all about retaliation and launching a massive response against Russia and or China, and it's very confusing, and it's like it kind of mischaracterizes the way we would respond. And it's got, then the third one is the president and how he sees it. And of course, what it realistically depicts is how really poorly thought out the failure of deterrence actually is. Because it turns out this missile is headed dead on Chicago. And of course, all three of them end when the missile, it's a 18-minute flight time or 20-minute flight time in each of the segments. And right when the missile hits Chicago, each segment ends. But what you're left with is that this is madness. We've got to get away from, you're left with the impression we got to stop these nuclear weapons. We can't have this. It's too irrational. And this is sort of the approach, rather than why don't we have better missile defense?
Hmm.
Why don't we have a better understanding of who's launching, and what is our policy? Are we going to launch automatically on Russia? Are we going to hold Russia responsible if North Korea launches a weapon at us? Or hold China and Russia responsible? How is this going to work? Israel had supposedly, according to Seymour Hersh, and I don't trust him, Israel had the
Mm.
Samson doctrine or option where they just nuke everybody that is connected with responsibility for nuking Israel. This kind of thing. I mean, it's all so badly thought through on our side that you can make a movie about this, show how crazy it is, and still make us to blame for it. The Russians are not to blame. The Russians are just defending themselves, right? But what about us defending ourselves? And then it's all about the nuke. It's not about defending ourselves. They realistically depict our ballistic missile defense is not adequate. One part of it's called hitting a bullet with a bullet, which is how our ABM works. Why don't we have Russia's ABM system where we fire the ABM up and it has its own nuclear warhead and it's a massive EMP effect, right?
Yeah.
That basically takes out a missile at, um, exoatmospherically at, 100 kilometers away. Of course, it wipes out a lot of the satellites in that zone. And we've got neutron warheads in the atmosphere that can also take out incoming warheads when it's in its final approach stage. That's what the Russians have. That's what the S-500 system does. That's what the S-400 and S-300. They're dual purpose surface-to-air missile, ABM systems. But we didn't ever develop that. Russia has a comprehensive anti-ballistic missile defense nationwide. We've got,
Hmm.
I think, what General Van Herk said was that we have 40 launchers
Yeah. I mean, to put this into perspective, I mean,
to defend. Yeah.
the Soviets had always the Soviets had been the biggest crybabies ever, right? So they were crying about West German research into biodefense. Okay, it's a big field. I mean, when COVID happened, a lot of these top scientists they were I think instructed not to touch anything that has to do with military biodefense, even though they're part of it unofficially because they advise governments. So they were so off limits when it came to questions of was COVID a bioterror attack or bioweapons or bioweapon that got out or a potential bioweapon that got out, blah, blah, blah. They were instructed basically not to say anything that has to do with biodefense because a public debate could screw up biodefense. If people and journalists start looking into how are our defenses, how good are we with these things? And so the Soviets were crying about West German research. And we've had some tremendous institutions, very old universities, very tied into the Anglo world, and they've done some outstanding work. Then they were bitching and crying about the nuclear power industry because we've actually come up with some really good nuclear power plants. The research attached to it, the research institutions, the knowledge of it, they were crying about that. And so now we have, or Germany has always had this almost nuclear weapons program. So we could have been potentially making nuclear weapons really fast. Japanese, same. Now South Korea, same. Some other countries, same, because now it's cheaper to go do the last steps. So yeah, there's like there's also that. I mean, the Russians are not the only ones who have this sort of figured out. But when I look at the current news, right, and public news is always very, very simplified, compressed. It's just unclassified level stuff, and we have to talk about the more classified stuff or some of the we have to approximate some of the super secret stuff and sort of get closer and closer to it using as many data points as we can. So why don't we try that? I have this news item here. This is from the Wall Street Journal. It says, Trump says he's not planning Venezuela strike. President had said recently the U.S. was considering strikes against targets in the country. and of course, in true Trump fashion, he was saying, "Yeah, I'm game on, but yeah, maybe not, maybe yes, maybe not." It's like this thing that he does, or he's doing with his doing with his administration. They talk about the drug thing. The U.S. military has identified targets in Venezuela that include military facilities used to smuggle drugs. I mean, sure, there wasn't someone from the administration recently on the Joe Rogan show. Was it Vance? Was it somebody talking about, or Patel? Was it Patel talking about the fentanyl thing when there's countries delivering or smuggling chemicals into the U.S. to make fentanyl, and it's supposed to, this weakens America, so it becomes a military or national security issue. It's not like the left is always whining, oh, it's everything is just a pretext. They're doing things with the pretext on the war on drugs. There is drugs have a national security components. If the more the more fentanyl and cocaine and meth and super marijuana that will basically knock out a stoner in a few seconds, it does become an issue. We've heard this even on this Joe Rogan podcast that has gone into a very, very dangerous direction. But we've even heard guests on the Rogan show from former Navy SEALs, Green Berets, whatever, and they talked about the problems of finding enough healthy, fit young men to join the military or even the special forces. And they say the two main reasons people are excluded from that is obesity and marijuana. Because you can make soldiers out of many people, especially if they're obese and stoners and have abused THC or cannabis to a significant
Yeah, you
degree.
had some deficits, and that stuff stayed in your
It's a
body for a
national
while.
security issues. I mean, yeah, they had some silly
Yeah.
movies in the Cold War, like Reefer Madness, but it wasn't all silliness. It wasn't all what the left is always saying. This reactionary thing of, let's just, if people drink alcohol and go to church, that's okay. But if people smoke marijuana, and that's always bad.
Mhm.
But it has a national security component. There have been
It
opium
does.
wars.
Yeah.
There were opium wars fought. I was in London in September with my family. We were on these warships. We were on the ships that carried I think they had all this info in it about the opium wars, how they could, ferry X amount of crates of X amount of crates
Opium.
of opium or tea, and the opium wars, and then of course the effect it had in China, and then of course
And of course
it
the
went in the other
Chinese,
direction. Things went
yeah,
in the
because
other
the other
direction eventually.
direction, yeah, because Mao went into business with the opium growers in China and developing opium for his own weapon of subversion within the Chinese Civil War, and then went to export it, saying to Khrushchev after Stalin's death, we need to do an opium war against the West. And this is what Joe Douglas's book, Red Cocaine, is about. Not only opium, they went over to cocaine. And what's wrong with these drugs? Marijuana, opium, cocaine, that's not wrong with alcohol. Alcohol is very destructive, we know. But the thing is, alcohol is also a beverage. Wine's a beverage. There's lots of people that drink wine, and it doesn't destroy their life. They have wine with dinner. They can even get drunk on Friday nights or whatever, and they're still functional. There's functional alcoholics.
Hmm.
There are not that many functional potheads, right? And it isn't. It is that, and I don't know if you. I've known people who smoke marijuana. I can tell by the way they're reasoning. There's a disconnect. Two
Hmm.
plus two
Hmm.
equals five when you're on pot, and it's a revelation, right? An alcoholic is slowed down. His reasoning isn't that sharp, but two plus two is still four, even when you're drunk,
Yeah.
right? So, there's severe alcoholism, but, even light pot smoking, to me, it's problematic because I've known them. And I know, I had a buddy years ago, and he said, "Oh, you have to try this because you get all these insights." And I go, "Okay, I
I
know you're
can
going to
have them
smoke it
any other
tonight."
way.
You call me up and you make a list of your insights when you're high, and you call me up and you read it off to me. And he did that. We did that as an experiment, and it was like total gibberish nonsense. And
Yeah.
I said, none of that makes any sense. And he was very embarrassed. But there was a scientist who were kind of pro marijuana back in the 90s, I think it was, or maybe it was the early 2000s. He had done a 20-year study because he thought, oh, this stuff is harmless. He did a 20-year study on the effect of pot, small chronic use, not somebody that's just bonging themselves into oblivion every night, but long time use. He says, well, 20 years of using marijuana regularly. And basically, he said, your brain shrinks. It goes to the size of a walnut,
And
and it
yeah,
has
and
all
I
these
have
negative effects on your
yeah, and there's
lungs,
like
right?
there's like this. I mean, there are these studies that say when you have light cannabis use starting at the age of at least 25, preferably 30, that may work for some people. Maybe they
Yeah,
get
because your
something
brain
out of
is
it.
already developed.
But
Yeah.
if you start as a teenager, you're cooked. And now I see this thing with the tech bros. We talked about that on a previous episode. If people want to check that out, this whole thing about Elon Musk and some of these these guys with Palantir and all these corporations.
Micro use of hallucinogens,
Supposed
right?
micro use. I mean, there is a case. There is research on maybe
Yeah.
some of these natural alkaloids. If under professional supervision, they can help veterans, with depression, and maybe they can
Yeah.
rewire certain things so they don't have to have this trauma constantly with them.
Yeah, PTSD.
But
Yeah.
you can also use legitimate research and use legitimate legitimate use. You can also use that as a slippery slope to then say, oh, now we can hand this out, or doctors can hand this out to more and more people, anybody who says he's
Mhm.
depressed. We saw this with cannabis. I mean, first it was medical marijuana for cancer people and old people that
Mhm.
have trouble eating. Good. Okay, fine. But then it was anybody who fakes back pain, anybody who fakes, this
Oh,
problem,
yeah.
that now they can
In
ride. They could
California.
ride around with a
Stupid.
pound with a pound of marijuana, super strength marijuana, and say, "I have a card. If the police stops me," in some states in
Yeah.
the U.S., they cannot even search your car anymore if your car reeks of marijuana. That used to
Mhm.
be immediate probable cause to search an entire vehicle. But now in certain states, you can say, yeah, I smoked 2 days ago. I can still drive. And if you seem like you're still
Right.
functioning, you can just happily drive along. But it was a slippery slope. Then it was everybody who faked some problem or exaggerated something got a medical marijuana card. They can do the same thing
Mhm.
with the psychedelics. I mean, we've heard
Yes.
Elon Musk talk about some prescribed microdosing. Then there's rumors and accusations that he goes to these tech parties um, where allegedly certain people are taking larger amounts of substances, which, in all fairness, was a thing in the ancient world, in the big empires in the ancient world. We have research on
Mhm.
that now. But these are very important people tied to national security. There's cause for concern, I think, and if they can get it to a point where every moron can get a medical card for psychedelics, the mushrooms, the peyotes, the whatever, the chemical DMT, um, that's going to be a big problem. Then we saw the influencers, Alex Jones, Joe
Oh,
Rogan.
yes.
Oh, it's so
Mhm.
great. Psychedelics, it's so cool. And I listened to the 60s music, which was a whole another thing. Um, and it's so cool and it makes people better. And then the fans, the young people, they start doing it. The conspiracy influencers push this. David Icke famously said, "Yeah, I did this once or twice or 5 times. I don't remember. I was in a life crisis. I had this weird arthritis in my hands. I had a soccer career. I had a television career, but then I was out of it." And I was depressed, so I went to the rainforest and I got ayahuasca. And then this voice started talking to me for hours, and it was downloading all this great information. Then I understood the universe and everything.
Yeah.
So more people will do it. Eventually, it will become a national security issue.
Do
If
you hear the
millions,
voices too? You know?
what?
Do you hear the voices too?
No, 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 no.
You
I'm
know,
not.
what is no, I'm just making a joke. You know, the thing is, what is a schizophrenic? It's a person who
Yeah,
a paranoid schizophrenic is a person who hears voices telling
yeah.
them to do bad things or telling them bad things. And it's considered an illness, or at least it's a definite
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
deficit.
then there was this
When
piece I
Yeah.
talked about this on like months ago, maybe a year ago. There was this big piece in some publication where somebody said, yeah, the conspiracy and new right wing, all right wing circles, the Dugin stuff, all these groups in Europe and in America,
Mhm.
they're all celebrating psychedelics, and they say, oh, it's a tradition.
Yes.
The Germanic tribes did this. Everybody did this, and it makes you connected with nature. But research says you can basically bake in stupid information into somebody, not
Mhm.
just how the left used to do it, and tell people, oh, maybe you want to try a little bit of LSD, and they give you all this propaganda, and then you take LSD, and then it's really baked in. The propaganda is really
Right.
baked in, and scientists found out you can do this with the right wing, the ecos, anybody, and it has a long, long, long ass lasting effect. And so I do understand now. I mean, I have a better understanding now that drugs, recreational or pseudo medical uses, it does have a national security impact. So
Yes.
with this
Yeah,
Venezuela
I
thing
agree
or
because
this,
because because chemical weaponry, the Russians did a lot of experiments in mind control drugs, and of course, you hear about truth serum, and you know what the very first truth drug that the United States developed in World War II to use on people they wanted to interrogate, it was marijuana.
oh
Was the
yeah,
first truth drug
oh yeah,
because and they tested it in New York on a mafia guy that they knew had murdered someone, and they laced his cigarette with the drug in marijuana, and they gave him the cigarette, and they had an OSS guy because the mafia was working with
mm,
U.S. intelligence. We were invading Italy, we were invading Sicily, and the mafia was helping us. So the mafia was being patriotic, and they didn't want to arrest the guy for the murder. They just wanted to see if this drug worked, and it worked. The guy actually, once they got him smoking that cigarette, he loosened up and he actually confessed to this murder.
oh, and
Of course, this is a professional interrogator.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they sometimes they combined this with pillow talk. The mafia also had some women seducing some guys. Then there was cannabis involved or THC involved, and then they would
Mhm.
spill the beans.
Yes.
So they
Yep.
could frame it in a certain way that would increase the effect of getting somebody to loosen up. So
Now,
it
now, the
it
now, Joe Douglas wrote a book, which is not published. I edited it after his death. He was working on a book when he died, which has unfortunately not been published because it just nobody was happy with my edits, and I was pretty much exhausted at that point. I couldn't do any more. But in that book, he documents, and it's from the defector Jan Shana and other sources, that the Russians developed with the Czechs, because the Czechs had the more advanced chemical industry in terms of understanding chemical effects on the brain. They developed mind control drugs, or that they actually used on people. And there were a number of them. A friendship drug was the most popular one, but it was basically a brainwashing drug. Well, and it mainly works best on narcissistic individuals. Ironically enough, you look at our big captains of industry, a lot of them have narcissistic personalities. Um, and that's who it works on, and how this drug works. And there was a testimony that Shana, there was a guy in the communist establishment in communist Czechoslovakia, a high party member who got convicted of a crime and sent to prison, and then they rehabilitated him later. And he came to Jan Shana's office as part of his rehabilitation. And Shana asked him, he said, "Why did you confess if you were innocent? Why did you confess in court?" And he told him the following story. He said, "Well, I was in jail, and they were going to put me on the stand in my own trial, and did that. They injected me with something, and then they talked to me after they injected me, and everything they told me what I did. They told me the crimes and things I did that were wrong. And when after I had this drug in me, I believed them that I'd done all those things.
The
I mean,
false memories.
whatever
Yeah.
they told me, I believed. So this drug had somehow paralyzed the critical part of his brain where he could tell the truth from something that wasn't true. It was like anything they
Yeah.
told him, he believed. And he said, then they took me to the court. They put me in front. They questioned me, and I just admitted all the things they told me I had done. And then they took me back to my cell. And he said, then I had this horrible hangover. And
Hmm.
I thought to myself, as I was suffering from this hangover, why did I admit to all that? I didn't do any of that stuff. And it was the drug. And this is they were working on these drugs in the 50s and the 60s, and they perfected it in a friendship drug that you let's say you have an American executive, CEO, or even a diplomat. They go to a place, they're having dinner with a Soviet official, they salt the food with it. Again, the critical faculty is knocked out during the dinner, and then they basically use a kind of hypnosis technique to plant all these ideas in your head, and you go away thinking, "Oh, these Soviet people are nice. They're no. Why did I think they were evil?" Because you've just been reprogrammed. Now, it doesn't work on humble people because if you go then the next day and why did I think they're so nice? See, a humble person questions the things that are in their brain and
Yeah.
they question themselves. A arrogant person, a narcissistic person doesn't, because if they
Yeah,
say
I
it, then
noticed.
it's the
I
truth.
noticed a while
Yeah.
ago when this was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I sometimes I check on what the truthers are doing, and I watched a bit of the Alex Jones program, and they had like Jones and a few other people on, and they framed the whole thing as a feel good experience. They wanted you. They even told you to grab some alcohol, grab a drink, or whatever else. It's legendary how people got stoned on cannabis and then watched conspiracy content about everything and the Jews and the aliens and
Yeah.
the lizards, and they become programmed and they feel like they're among equals, among a brotherhood. And it was like this whole thing, yeah, and we're the good guys and everything we say, you could feel. I mean, as a German, we're kind of historically familiar with this sucking in and the grandiosity and this like everything is gonna be so great, and then it's not. But I mean, people really need to check out this old episode we did on General Bert Stubblebine, whom I spent
Oh
a
yes.
few weeks with in Panama for
Men who stare at goats, right? John
reasons,
Ronson's book.
because I saw his wife, Rima, on the Alex Jones show, and and then somehow I got to interview her for my
Mhm.
my program, and then they said, yeah, they want to visit Europe and blah blah blah, and somehow, because my wife knew these countries because she's traveled a lot, Panama, Costa Rica, Chile, various places, and so we just decided maybe we could spend a few weeks over there and work on a documentary, and shooting other materials, because I was also very interested in Bert. Everybody's called him Bert, Albert Newton Stubblebine the third. We just call him Bert, and so we shot footage, and even when they visited Europe, I think before we went over there, they visited Europe. I shot some footage of Bert in a hotel. I shot footage of Bert standing in Nuremberg at the old place where the Nazi rallies were held. And he was talking
Mhm.
about how he was a tank commander in training. He was stationed in the Cold War over here, and then he got moved to military intelligence. And so I worked on some things, shot some footage, and we went over there, shooting more footage with Bert and also with Rima because the idea was to make a documentary. And so I got to spend a few weeks with them. And I was so surprised how down to earth he was, because you heard about him, the stories and the movies and the old,
Yeah, yeah,
MK
the
Ultra type
John
stuff.
Ronson book. Yeah.
Yeah, and the old MK Ultra stuff, and you always saw the bits of the out there Bert. When he believed
Mhm.
people could go through walls and the dimensions and all this stuff. But that was just a fraction of who he was. In essence, he's been for the longest time a Cold Warrior. He dedicated his life to defending the United States, and he's been there, done that. And I started to piece his life together, especially when I figured out, okay, he in the Cold War, he was tasked with finding the enemy, using new technology and super secret stuff to find out where the enemy was, mixed with human intelligence. Okay, very very down to
Remote
earth.
viewing, right?
No,
Remote
that
viewing.
was that was later.
No?
That was later.
Okay.
It was just the most basic stuff you could imagine, and then things went sideways. Vietnam, other places,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
losses of life, failures, operational failures, and it took a toll on him emotionally. And it only came out much later that traitors, hardcore traitors, were essentially responsible to a large degree for these military failures. But he didn't know that at the time. He got out of these active conflicts, and apparently he was very depressed. He was
Mhm.
very much depressed. And then he got contacted by some weird people, organizations that attached themselves to the military circles. They had all these weird connections, some Russian connections, some weird British guys that were into the occult, military intelligence people from Britain, weird stuff. And they got close to American military personnel, and they started talking about the war of the future, the soldiers of the future, First Earth Battalion, using esoteric principles to, and maybe we can make the enemy high with substances so we don't have to shoot them. So it's going to be a great new warfare, a totally new style of warfare, and that got to Bert. They got him. And I assume, strongly assume, that he started to use some substances that changed him, alongside with the propaganda. That changed him fundamentally. There was still the old Bert in him, to a very large
Mhm.
degree. It's not just like what you see on the internet. There was still the old Bert, the Cold Warrior, the defender of the homeland, but they got to him using the stuff and using his situation that he was in emotionally, and then they baked in some of these ideas, and they
Mhm.
turned one of the best Cold Warrior guys into this man who thought, I don't really know anymore. Who's the bad guy now? And I don't really know anymore. And the conspiracy stuff and maybe aliens. And it's like, they got him. So
Mhm.
the drug thing has national security impacts. So I'm I don't know at this point what it's about with these drug boats in that they're shooting now at recently, but
Yeah, I don't fully understand that either.
you don't get
Mm.
told the whole story in the Wall Street Journal. And it's like,
No.
it says the Trump administration has rapidly built up its military forces in the Caribbean in recent weeks,
It
sending
is
America
building up. Yeah.
sending
Yeah.
America's most advanced aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, and its accompanying warships, a squadron of F-35B stealth planes in Puerto Rico, Special Operations Force, other military hardware. So there's more going on that we get to see. Then there's this piece from the Moscow Times. This is not a pro Russian publication. Headline says, this is 23 hours ago. Venezuela's Maduro seeks Russian military support amid U.S. buildup in the Caribbean. Um, they talk about these Sukhoi 30 jets as a deterrent, logistical support, missile units, a medium-term financing plan of 3 years through Russian state defense conglomerate Rostec. So yeah, it's a thing. It's really a thing, and there's no easy button. The United States cannot say, we'll just not do much and then maybe it all goes away. There's always more behind it. I mean, especially from the communist states. And it's like, I mean, how can people say it's not communism anymore? Anybody who is left in Germany now, in the US, in Africa, in Latino space, they're so old school. The way they think, the way they dress, culturally, it's so old school. How can anybody think it's over? How can anybody say, nah, it's just totally different now? And it's like, it's the same players.
But they all say that. Marxism Leninism supposedly is not a term, which is what you mean by communism. Marxist Leninism supposedly is no longer a problem. It doesn't exist. It's not a meaningful term. I've had people say, "Why do you use the word communism? You should stop using that word. You sound stupid. You sound like some knuckle-dragging anti-communist from the 50s." It's like, we left all that behind. The Soviet Union collapsed. Get over it. Just like Obama's taunt to in the presidential race to the Republican in 2012. The 1980s wants its foreign policy back or something like that. The fact is, yeah, Cuba is a Marxist-Leninist state run by it's a one-party totalitarian system. Venezuela, I'm sorry, however they want to color it as populist left, it's communist. I've talked to defectors from there. It's a communist regime. It's Marxist-Leninist. Nicaragua, Marxist-Leninist regime. South Africa, look, the ANC is a front for the South African Communist Party. I don't care what they said in Angola, Namibia, these other countries. The ruling party was a Marxist-Leninist party, and it still is, even though they've declared themselves democratic reforms, just like in the Russian Federation. I'm sorry. It's all a deception scheme organized by Russia to get us to take the eye off the ball, the fact that there is a Marxist-Leninist bloc, the socialist camp, what we called the communist bloc. It still exists. They gave up a bunch of countries, which they still have networks inside and are still manipulating. Countries like, Czechia and Hungary and Slovakia are still, they're in NATO, but they're really helping the Kremlin. And they're going to extend these networks. And you look at these German communists are still there. They haven't gone away. They've got these major fifth columns, and they've we've got major politicians
and what
in the
about
West
those?
that are
What
really,
about those no kings protests? These huge demonstrations.
yeah,
Oh,
organized by young communists.
we don't want kings. Kings are bad. I mean, wasn't Mao a king? Wasn't Mao a king? Wasn't Stalin a king? Were these other guys not kings? Clean up your own damn mess before you get into this. Oh, Trump is a king. I mean, he's not. I mean,
get all these old boomers who love the left to get in there and to protest and it's just look, people are so deluded. They're ideologically oriented, just like the crazy MAGA and AFD people that are pro-Russian. These people were defending the terrorists in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s and saying America was evil.
yeah.
Now it's ironic. These people are pro-Ukraine, but that's just part of the elaborate Russian
and if you see,
manipulation.
And
Yeah.
then there's culturally, there's this new movie. I haven't seen it yet. This is like a celebrated Hollywood production with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's something about some guy in a group. They're blowing things up or shooting. It's just violence, and it's supposed to be super left wing. And then you see some clips from Quentin Tarantino movies like Django, which is a story of a freed slave during the slave era, and he gets together with this German-Austrian guy played by a very famous Austrian actor. I think his name is Waltz, Christoph Waltz, something like that. And so this duo then hatches out a plan. They want to buy the wife of the former slave by pretending to be very cynical guys, just in it for the money, and they go to this traditional deep south mansion where Leonardo DiCaprio plays this unhinged, evil, satanic landowner and slave owner, and every white guy is a demon. And they try to coax this slave owner into selling the woman. And they're acting like they're total cynics, and yeah, it's all about the business, but they really want to free this woman. And it ends up, like every Tarantino movie, in an orgy of violence. And it's like, it's deeply leftist. We know that Tarantino has celebrated the old Chinese kung fu movies, which were extremely communist in nature,
Oh yeah.
because it was always about the downtrodden regular guys in China that rise up and have these magic abilities, and they fight and use violence to free themselves. It's always a rallying cry for violence and violence and violence. I mean, I get these flashbacks. I mean, I'm not old enough for an actual flashback, but still from history. I get these flashbacks to the RAF when you see some of these younger guys in their 20s now, and
The Red Army faction, not the Royal Air Force,
in Germany, they're like this close. They're like this close to playing a support role in violence or an active role in violence. They're just waiting for the signal, and they're waiting for that idea that there's a big group behind them and a foreign country behind them to actually push or have the green light. And then we got this Trump, which ties into that. Trump authorizes CIA covert operations in Venezuela. So assuming this is old school, like during Reagan or Nixon, you disrupt these communist plans. You identify key actors, key agents that prepare violence, that prepare bigger things, and you try to get a regime change going. I mean, we've heard so much whining about, oh my God, there was such a nice government in Iran, and then it was just toppled by the evil CIA. It wasn't like that. It was not a nice government that was toppled by the great Satan. And Chile. I mean, my wife has lived there for a significant amount of time. She knew someone whose great grandfather, whatever, was a very high-ranking person in Chile. We know how it is. It's you either get a conservative or sometimes a military type system when there's no other option. You get that, or you get full-on communism. And so far, the U.S. could always balance it out, so you didn't have an extended Soviet Union or extended Soviet type system in the Latino sphere. Sometimes they get a communist regime and they try, then they get pushed back, and every time the media machinery starts, it's the evil satanic slave happy, slave owning CIA blah that will topple the nice people's revolution. It's the same thing over and over again. It says here, I authorized for 2 reasons, Trump said Wednesday, or whatever, at the White House, alleging Venezuelan leaders have emptied their prisons into the United States of America, and we have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. Oh my God, the undocumented illegal immigrants. Oh my God, they can actually be used to start something major and burn things down.
As a weapon,
and tie down American forces, so they're busy and they can't go somewhere else.
And to cause havoc inside the United States internally.
Yeah.
Rising crime create a dilemma for us. And then if you try to restrict the immigration, the dumping of criminals and others in the United States, you're a racist.
Exactly.
And of course, the United States is the only country, and aside from Europe, maybe the first world is not allowed to have a border. Every other country can have a border. You can't just go into that country and admit yourself and squat somewhere.
Oh, exactly. And also the when the Chinese regime was stabilizing itself, purge by purge, they actually had this concept of the black classes in society, not meaning skin pigmentation. It just means the bad classes, the low class, and a lot of these the poorest people in China They were flooding into the cities because they thought maybe if I get the crappiest, most horrendous factory job, it's better than on the countryside where we starve to death, and maybe my children will have it better than my factory life. But they were deporting a lot of these people back to the countryside, and they're still poor. There's hundreds of millions of dirt poor people in China, and there's people still trying to get into the cities and the factories, working 12 hours a day for pennies. Still going on. And now we get this. There's a headline: as China raises pressure, U.S. to support Seoul in building, or means South Korea, in building nuclear-powered sub. A stealthy submarine will reduce the burden on American forces as threats from Beijing and Pyongyang rise. So there is activity going on. There is this, I think, this obfuscation with the Trump administration. There's no, I mean, at this point, there's no final answer. How much is theater? I've seen it before. You know, when the U.S. was, certain U.S. circles were pretending to be buddies with the Nazis, and certain Brits were pretending to be buddies with the Nazis, but then we learned it was deception. But we also know the degree of foreign penetration. We also have evidence of massive amounts of spy penetration. And I think both things are going on at the same time. I think there's theater, strategic theater, but there's also compromised people. And that makes it so difficult to judge from the outside, and I think from the inside. Because if you have somebody who does something weird, has weird contacts, he can always pretend to be one of the guys that do theater and say, yeah, don't worry, I'm just playing the Chinese, I'm just playing the Russians. But is he? Is he really?
Well, look at Charles Lindbergh. I know a lady that has some papers regarding this. Charles Lindbergh was very much attacked. Lucky Lindy's the first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and he's a Scandinavian American who was beloved in Berlin as an Aryan person, and he cavorted with Hitler and the Nazi elite before the war. But it turns out he was an American spy.
Yeah.
He was actually working for U.S. intelligence before the war to penetrate the Nazis, to find out what they were doing in terms of their air forces and stuff.
Oh, and a
But
traitor. There's like
his
this
name was
thing when
blackened.
there's like this thing when a high-ranking traitor who signed the documents and gets money on the side from the Russians or whatever. When a high-ranking traitor, oftentimes he gets fed material like from the Russians, and this material is considered valuable. It's like giving up something to get something bigger. So this traitor will actually seem like a hero for a while. He can uncover some nefarious Russian operations, or he can bust a ring in Venezuela, or he's a successful guy. He's the hero.
So he can get promoted within the U.S. intelligence system.
But all the Russians are doing is they feed him the material, and they say, okay, we're going to give up this ring. We're going to give up another spy. We're going to give up some operations to bolster your position so you can rise up higher. Maybe you're going to be president one day. Maybe you're going to be, I don't know, Secretary of Defense one day.
Head of the CIA or deputy head of the CIA.
Exactly. Yep. So you think it's a hero, and if people get suspicious of him, he can always say, yeah. Sometimes, high-ranking discussion, eyes only, he can say, yeah, sometimes I have to give the Russians something to trick them. I'm playing them, you know. I have to give up something, an operation here, an asset there. I have to feed them something because that's how I get my sources, my information, my spies over there can get me some stuff. But he's a traitor. He's the worst thing ever. So
it's very hard on the double game. It's very hard, and the Russians are experts at playing this game. By the way, their institutions, they've got institutional culture in playing this penetration double agent game. We know after the Cold War, every one of the U.S. spies in East Germany and in communist Cuba were doubled back on us. We didn't have any authentic sources in either communist country. And I would submit that the Soviet Union, it was very similar, and other communist countries, our position was similar. We were fed false information. If we got a penetration, it was quickly turned. Why? Because the heart of the CIA was penetrated first. And if you are
Mm.
inside the brain of the CIA or MI6 or German or French intelligence, you know immediately when they have a spy, they've recruited someone, and you can find that person that's recruited. You can turn them and then make it as feed them false information and make them think they've got the inside track on what the Kremlin is thinking or what in Havana or East Berlin their thinking is. And this is how you control it's perceptions management, reflexive control. They have all these ways of controlling. Perceptions management is the key to creating active measures or deception operations where the
And a
whole
sick
Western establishment
culture,
is
yeah,
taken in.
sick intelligence
Yeah.
culture. I mean, if you can distort the entire intelligence culture, you get failures and failures and failures. Here's a headline. It
And
says,
they don't even know they're
yeah,
failures,
yeah,
right?
they
And
think
you've got
that's the way we do it.
institutional
That's
management that doesn't want to
yeah,
admit any failures.
we've always done it this way. You know, we have to accept the failures and we just hope for the best. Here's a headline. It says, Trump tells Asia allies it's your turn to boost military spending. Yeah, I mean that's been an issue for years, but now it's ramping up because I mean, what moron thinks the U.S. can defend everybody? You know, Europeans and the Asians and themselves and everything. There has to be a division of labor. There has to be a division of tasks, and they say this here. Um, they say this here. Trump has frequently claimed that allies are shortchanging the U.S. on security, particularly Japan and South Korea, which host roughly 60,000 and 28,500 American personnel in their countries, respectively. Seoul has already pledged to significantly raise its defense budget next year, with the goal of spending 3.5%. 3.5% of its gross domestic product on defense by 2035. Ahead of summit talks, Lee told Trump that South Korea's military spending was 1.4 times the size of North Korea's entire economy. Yeah, but they get their stuff from Russia and China and vow to significantly boost Seoul's defense capabilities to help reduce Washington's defense burden. I mean, it's like a stupid game when you say, yeah, we don't go too much. Maybe if we don't do that much, maybe the Americans will spend more. And, you know, maybe America is so intimidating then that it's all going to work out. But hello, North Korea doesn't have an economy to speak of. They have to produce fentanyl and meth and smuggle it to foreign countries. They have to do cyber hacking to get into your computer so your processor will mine cryptocurrencies behind your back so they can siphon off the money. That's their economy, but they're just like a proxy tool. They're like a little extension of China and Russia anyways. So how can you defend that spending by saying, "Oh, we're outspending the North Koreans"? What is this? Elsewhere, Trump and members of his administration have suggested Taiwan should spend as much as 10% of GDP on defense, a tall order for Taiwan when the figure has long hovered around 2%. What is this? I mean, it's like,
Well, at least it is 2%. Germany hasn't managed to get its up to 2% yet.
yeah. I mean, but there's like, I mean, with Germany, I'm more familiar with the background stuff in Germany and what industries can immediately switch over to military production and how much money can be funneled into production. I mean, it's kind of the same with South Korea too. They can convert things like pretty much any significant country can. This is just the surface talk, what they give you here in these newspapers, and it's up to the audience to fill in the blanks, and it's up to us to fill in blanks and tell people how to actually fill blanks in a professional way. It's just yeah, and then there was this. This was from October 22nd. This was an exclusive story in the Wall Street Journal. They said United States lifts key restriction on Ukraine's use of European long-range missiles. So the US says Ukraine can use missiles from Europe. to hit targets in Russia, their fuel economy, the fuel production, some other military targets, and if very long range, significantly long range, and we now see some of these effects. This was, where is my tab here? This was, where the heck is the story here? Here, Ukraine's drone commander Maida promises blackouts in Russia after new strikes. A rumble in Moscow Oblast, Ukraine hits critical military fuel pipeline near Russian capital. Sources say. Then this from today in the Kiev Independent, Ukraine has hit nearly 160 Russian oil facilities in 2025, the SBU intelligence agency says. So this is a significant this is truly a significant development, and they also have the domestic drone production in Ukraine that also gets help from other countries, becoming a significant player as long as things don't get nuclear, as long as things don't get smallpox or some other lesser but still significant biological weapons, because these things can change everything. If you're a rocket commander, you think rockets. If you're a tank commander, you think tanks. But who has the overview? Who has a computer system that can simulate all these different types of weapons being used in a mixture? I mean, when COVID happened, I said to people, there's a whole background to this. It's not just about containing COVID just for COVID. There is some literature, not a lot publicly available, but there's some literature that says the military is aware of mixed attacks, mixed strikes, biological and nuclear, biological and cyber. Suddenly, power grid is down, computers are down, nothing works. You go outside, you break quarantine, then everybody gets infected. And so I always told people, don't jump to conclusions yet, because containing COVID means shortening the time window where we are especially more vulnerable to, let's say, a cyber attack. And we know the Russians are in our systems. We know they have people in power grid, power stations, and all of this.
No, I take a different different view of the response to COVID. I think the communists, the Chinese, they manipulated our pharmaceutical industry and our CDC, National Institutes of Infectious Medicine. Mr. Medicine there, who was what's
the
that?
UN, the
Food,
WHO guy, the communist at the WHO.
And the scientists, some of the scientists here in the U.S. that collaborated with the Chinese when they wanted to do research on this bat virus. They started to do the gain of function research in China, paid for with American. And of course, I think there's a cover up there. I think that the Chinese penetrating and compromising our biological defense system was part of what was going on. And I think it was a test. I think the COVID virus was dangerous. It wasn't a fake, but I think it was a chimera. I think now the evidence shows it was a chimera attack. It was an attack on the West that China did. And I agree with the Chinese defector, Dr. Li Mingyan, who I know personally. I've spent time talking to her. She says it was released on purpose. It wasn't accidental. They created a whole cover story to cover that they could say, if you didn't believe it was bat soup, right, that got out in the market in Wuhan, it was from that Wuhan level 3 lab there that was working on the bat. And the bat lady, that Chinese general who was an expert in the bat viruses, I think it was released on purpose. Yeah.
The whole thing. I mean, if you look at the basics of the populations that got hit by COVID, the Chinese say they have too many people. They have too many old people. They want to get rid of them because they don't want to pay for the pensions. Rid of them.
Yes,
because that's communism. That's communism. If you're no longer useful for the economy, useful for this communist machinery, you have zero value in communism, so you better die quick. So they have lots of old people that they can't pay for. They want to get rid of their old people. So that's their that was the outset of China getting hit by COVID. It kills their old people. Now, what's going on in the West and even Japan? They don't have enough people. They don't have enough babies. A lot of people are older, and they're still part of the economy, or they're still part of many other things. And so the Germans, we have one of the lowest birth rate. When you don't count all the migrants, we have one of the lowest birth rates. We have a lot of people. There were like almost 20 million Germans that were particularly vulnerable to COVID because they were above the age of 55 or 60, had obesity, heart problems, preconditions, and so we were especially vulnerable. America has an obesity problem, and there's still many Americans above the age of 50 who are super productive. Yes, obesity, yes, alcohol, but super productive and super important. And so we got hit in a different way by the same virus, right? Because there was so many Americans that had trouble working. Many Americans died under bad conditions, and it just slowed down those that did not die from it. Germany had an issue because of all the situation here, but the Chinese, they could get rid of their old people, and African allies, these African some of these African countries, they had some of the least amount of problems with COVID, because in some places the average age of the population is in the 20s. So young people, not so much affected by COVID, pro-China. China has been invading Africa for a long time with their business, and there's new Silk Road where they can ship things from China mainland all the way to Africa and into Europe. Military grade infrastructure they've created. It was different. So that's kind of like, that's beside the missiles, that's beside the tanks, that's beside the atomic rockets. It's a communist system. They want to get rid of their old people. They don't care if they're, if they lose a few millions or 10 millions more or 20 millions more. But if we lose 10 million, if Germany loses 10 million, we're cooked. If the United States loses the people above 50 who are workhorses, who are so important in everything. If America loses 10 million of those people, not totally cooked as we would be, but still very, very significant. So yeah, there's some stuff happening definitely with but then there's this is from Euromaidan Press, also a very, very decent publication. Headline is Stop Fighting Now, Talk Borders Later. RFERL uncovers EU's hush-hush plan to lock the Russia-Ukraine war in place. The first phase would freeze the front line and bar Ukrainian offensives, with negotiations on territorial governments deferred to the next phase. Now, this is something that the Russians have been partially entertaining. Now, this is from the original source is this here. This is Radio Free Europe or Radio Liberty. This is from the Cold War. I mean, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, they've been connected to the U.S. The U.S. State Department, some CIA connections, which the left has been whining about forever. I mean, those were the circles that used to blast shortwave radio into the Soviet Union, where people, especially on the countryside, could actually receive those broadcasts because those signals were not jammed everywhere, and so they could learn about the gulags, they could learn about how life was really like in the West. Yes, we do have milk. Unlike the propaganda over there said, we have milk. We have lots of other things. We have refrigerators. We have 20 different kinds of milk if we want to buy them. And so they now uncovered something So this is basically the Anglosphere kind of messing things up a bit for some of these weird Europeans by uncovering this thing. Um, this is from October 28th. This is from like a few days ago. One of the latest attempts of these weird EU circles, one of the latest attempts is a leaked 12-point plan seen by RFERL, initiated by Finland, that has been circulating in European capitals in recent weeks. The document is not a ready-made peace deal. It has also not been discussed at a higher EU level nor officially endorsed by any country. Rather, it is something that has been worked on by the Coalition of the Willing, a collection of over 20 countries supporting Ukraine since the spring. The 12 points are framed around two phases. The first one, ceasefire, and the other, negotiations. A ceasefire-first approach is something that most European nations have been pushing for forever since the Trump administration started talking with the Kremlin. The document states that such a ceasefire will begin 24 hours after the parties have accepted this plan, and that a line of contact will be frozen at the point where it is at the start of the ceasefire. Second phase, the text notes that negotiations on a final line of contact will begin, which will remain in effect until the parties have agreed on permanent governments of the occupied territories, security zones established, security guarantees. The ninth point is controversial as it concerns a high-level dialogue between Kiev and Moscow to increase mutual understanding and respect for diversity of language, culture, and religion. Officials from Eastern EU countries that RFERL has been in touch with believe that this point plays up Russian allegations, often regarded as baseless, that Russian language speakers in Ukraine were discriminated against and needed protection by Moscow. So basically, the EU is toying with the idea of adopting a key strategy from the Russians by cementing this phony narrative into official documents, by making fake admissions of, yeah, there was discrimination, yeah, there was this stuff going on, so that's why let the Russians keep such and such areas. And how do you negotiate security guarantees when it affects all countries in the world? And the Russians can get a pause and sort of rebuild, coordinate a new timetable with the Chinese, and then really strike, and then really go for it. And of course the Russians hope that we will all go back to sleep. Things go back to the way they were, and it's not so bad. It's not even as bad as it was in the Cold War. In the Cold War, there was a division, a line going through Germany. And so they will say if there's a line going through Ukraine, that's much better, right? Who can complain? And so this is sort of the
But the interesting thing is it's all null and void because Moscow isn't taking that deal. This is the mystery about bluffing. If Russia was bluffing to get a good peace deal, I think that they know that Europe and America would so pressure Ukraine that they would get this war over with and they would get what they want. If that was what they were really pushing for. But Russia is building up. This is Lee Wheelbarger's satellite info, and I've seen the pictures. Russia is building infrastructure to support an invasion into Western Europe all along the Belarusian, Polish, Baltic states frontier. It's undeniable. You can see the pictures. You can see the progress. Here's just an old dirty Cold War airstrip. Now they spent $100 million modernizing it. They put in helipads, they put in bunkers, they put in redundant communications. They're putting S-400 missiles in. They're even using coal cars on rail locomotives to ship in S-400s. They're just converting coal cars into missile carriers, and they're just moving them in. And it's like, this is massive activity. And then building giant fuel depots for refueling tanks and APCs all over the border, and then stockpiling vehicles, APCs. And you're looking at this, and they're moving self-propelled artillery. They just moved, what was it, 100? Was it 150 self-propelled guns to the border with Estonia, tiny Estonia, that only has an infantry brigade to defend it, and maybe a few, German or American self-propelled artillery, individual artillery pieces. I mean, I think there's five, and it's like, what the heck's going on? This is a buildup, and then Venezuela's mobilization. They gave an island north of Venezuela to the Russians. The Russians are building a 10,000-foot runway on this significant island north of Venezuela in the Caribbean Sea. What is all this mean? It's not. You see, if you're bluffing, you're spending billions of dollars for this bluff.
Yeah.
And why are there no tanks being destroyed in the Ukraine front? They're not putting any new tanks in. They're using, mules and horses on the Ukraine front. Where are all their trucks? We found a satellite picture in Kaliningrad, of all places, where there's over 400 truck cabs, the trucks without the trailer, all stashed at this one site in Kaliningrad. That's military supply trucks, you know, all piled up right there, waiting for the other end of them to show up on a train, I suppose. The train supposedly stopped running yesterday into Kaliningrad. So what is it going to show up by ship? If they already got them stored somewhere? When do the truck drivers arrive? Why this stockpiling? They supposedly need these. Kaliningrad can't support the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then they are putting drone netting on all their military headquarters and military buildings in Kaliningrad. Drone netting in Kaliningrad. I'm sorry, Ukrainian drones aren't going to Kaliningrad because they'd have to fly over Poland to get there. Doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, and it's like
They're
there's always
preparing
this.
for war against NATO.
Anytime you see this mentioned in the news about negotiations and blah blah blah, there are levels of negotiations that go above most people's heads. We understand these levels because let's take this headline for example. This is from The Insider. This is also a very good publication. It says a final countdown. At the current rate, the Kremlin will exhaust its financial reserves within a year. Wait, but what theater can the communist countries then play? They can make some sort of, these fake through gritted teeth declarations from the Russian side. Yeah, we have financial problems. Yeah, now we admit it. It's awful. But we can't go back, really. We cannot convert back our war economy to a civilian economy. That would really shred us. And the West is pushing. The West is pushing back on us so hard. So now we have no other choice but to make concessions to China, which we don't like, even though it's all staged. So now, through gritted teeth, we have to give territory or something territory to the Chinese because they need territory, and now the Chinese influence gets bigger, and it's like we don't like it, and so then the West then is supposed to think, oh, maybe now would be a prime opportunity to play off these two against each other. We can play off we can play the Russians against the Chinese and vice versa. Not a chance in hell. Not a chance. All of that has been pre-planned and pre-figured out, and they make a move, and it's supposed to look like they're behind, but they're 3 steps ahead, and our politicians and the academics that feed them, they will make all the wrong decisions and say, oh, okay, we'll play them off against each other. We'll make concessions to them.
But they don't understand
and to the others.
The West doesn't,
And it's like they ruined. All these academics that have been influencers and spies for so long, all these treacherous academics in the West, they've muddled the whole academic sphere. They've trained hordes of new people that get into the think tanks and become advisors to heads of state. They don't know they don't know their head from a hole in the ground. Oh, we can make power moves. We play them off against each other and blah 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 blah. And it's like, no, you're playing. I don't know. You're an amateur playing tennis against. You're playing tennis against the biggest pro in the world, and you just know basic tennis. And you're not in shape. It's like, That's
You're dead. Yeah.
not going to.
Well, this is what they don't understand about why it's so important to look at the defector literature because oh, okay. I'm not saying the Russians and Chinese communists are 10 feet tall. I'm saying they have certain characteristics. They have certain strategies. They're not stupid on the grand. They think that at the grand strategic level, at this very highest level, if you get it right, you can make all kinds of mistakes down here. But having it right up here, this is the master level. This is what's going to get you to where you want to go. You can always correct those tactical errors that are further down. They're the small stuff. You can get that right, but you got to get the grand strategy right. In the West, it's the opposite. We've got the technology and we've got all the tactics, but grand strategically, we don't really even name our enemy. We don't really understand who our enemy is. And that's a real problem. It's the Chinese and Russians. They know that we're the enemy. They've been plotting on this for years. Look at the defector testimony of Colonel Stanislav Luna. Chinese and Russians got together at the end of the Cold War. Of course, he said they probably were faking their enmity in the 1980s. They were really working together then, even
Yeah,
then.
in the 60s.
And
Yeah.
you got Golitsyn says they were working together. They plotted this whole thing out in the late 50s to have a fake split. The Sino-Soviet split was entirely a fake. You've got Nevin Gusak, who has published a book on this with thousands of footnotes showing they were collaborating when they were
Holy
supposedly at each other's
smokes.
throats.
Yeah.
Right. And so you look at this and you go, okay, so what Lunev says is they drew up a plan to destroy the United States, occupy North America, divide Canada and the United States between the two of them. And then you've got the secret speech of Chi Chen saying, well, how we're going to do it is we're going to use a biological weapon and we're going to kill off the Americans. We're just going to, if that doesn't work, it's going to be a nuclear war. And so we'll
Yeah, and
lose,
it's like,
either way, we're going to lose 400 million Chinese, but we're going to win,
and the
right?
kind of the outlook, the large long-term thinking, it's kind of the same of the communist long-term mentality. It's kind of the same mentality in a way that the Nazis had, but the communists are
Yes,
smarter. The communists are
absolutely.
more advanced. They've done this much longer and they're much better. But the general idea is that you have this end goal in mind. You defeat everybody, all of your enemies. You make the biggest moves that any empire has ever done in human history. You have a war that's on a different order of magnitude. Then you win. The planet is yours, and then you build the greatest temples because now you have the resources available. You can build the grandest temples and just celebrate and be in this rush forever, and then maybe figure out a way to live longer. But this is kind of the thing. You picture yourself in these grand temples that you're going to build. This is what the Hitler idea was, and the NSDAP had. They started somewhat putting way too many resources in starting to build the grander structures and buildings. They wanted to build a whole new capital city, the biggest temple-like structure that the world has ever seen. It was supposed to last for thousands of years, grander
This
than
is the
anything
Linz, the
before.
rebuilding of Linz, and
Yeah,
he called the new capital of Germany was going to
and
be Germania or
and
something.
this is like the true occultism of the Nazis, not the stuff you read on the internet about, stuff that people get stuff wrong all the time. Oh, Hitler was in that lodge. No, he wasn't. And this guy taught Hitler everything. No, it was more complicated. And we lost. We lost. The hard documented track at some point with Hitler, because when occultists professionalize, then the hard evidence starts to dry up, and it becomes a much bigger task to estimate what went on, to sort of approximate what went on. It's very tough to do, but we know that when the professionalism becomes bigger, it's same with any communist operative. When they leave the amateur level and they get professional training, suddenly they may not appear as a communist anymore in public. They will say, I was young, I was dumb, I don't know, I hated my parents. It's all in the past now. Now I'm totally different. or an Islamist. They teach a lot of Islamists. Now you get the real training. Now you gotta blend in. Now you gotta have a completely different life, a public life. So this is when people start notice, oh, this guy, Habib Ahmed, he was kind of a hard conservative Muslim, and he was saying all these things, but man, he really changed. He's totally cleaned up his act and seems a lot more modern now. No, he got
They're
more
do that
hardcore.
with,
He got a lot more
yeah,
hardcore.
they're doing that with AOC now. She's now just a regular Democrat. She's not a hard leftist anymore. They're
Yeah.
trying
Oh,
to
the system
do that because
tamed
she's
her.
going to run for
Yeah,
president.
yeah.
Yeah,
Politics tamed them. They're not like their old self. They got tamed now. They're all in the
yeah.
system now. No, they're not. Or they're in a different system than you think they are. And it's like with the occultism. I mean, here's an example. This is something that I have in my collection here. This is an opinion piece from the Moscow Times with the headline, How the Secretive Freemasons Stayed in the Kremlin's Good Books. The Moscow Times is keeping the author of this article anonymous because they remain in Russia. And they have like this big photo here with all the symbolism, a large group with their Masonic regalia, full regalia, all these special medals that they get. And it's like a serious looking bunch of people, senior people, very powerful people. This was the photo of the annual assembly of the Grand Lodge of Russia in Moscow in March 2025. Now, Freemasonry is an entry point. It's not the whole thing. It's an entry point, and it's all about whom you're with in the lodge environment. And then if you're part of that system, you can then be pulled into systems that don't have a recognizable name, or maybe it's recognizable to some people that study this really hard. But this is when, as I said, professionalizing, suddenly people may identify you as a Freemason. Maybe there's a photo of you in Masonic regalia, but once you leave that level and you go to a next level, there's no official name anymore for it, what you're doing. There's no...
Unofficially, you're a KGB agent.
Yeah, or in terms of when occultism is mixed with the KGB, which it has been for quite a long time, even if people mostly people don't
Probably
know
since
this.
the 1920s, really.
And so
Yeah.
then suddenly the occultism doesn't have a name anymore. You can't call it Freemasonry. You can't say, oh, well, this was created sort of, apparently not really.
You call it Duganism or Eurasianism.
In 1717 in London by people who were just in the mood for it, and suddenly this whole system was there. And then it found its way to some other places and it got changed and blah, blah, blah. No. The Eastern Roman Empire already had some of the elements that later became Freemasonry, and this Eastern Roman stuff then went further east and then into the Muscovy area, and that's what later became Russia. So this was the real professional level type stuff that was going on. At some point, official or semi-official Freemasonry found its way into Russia. Sometimes it got banned by various czars. Some czars were kind of into it. And then came conspiracy mythology.
Well, wasn't Nicholas II a Mason?
It was kind of on and off. It was kind of on and off. Some czars were kind of into it. Some czars tried to ban it because of, I think, more of the espionage risk. And then came conspiracy mythology.
It is complicated in Russia. Yeah. It's complicated in Russia.
I mean, once the traditional conspiracy mythology became a big thing, which was fairly early on, early 1800s. The left started. Was the left talking about the Jews?
Fouché was one of the big. Yeah, it was Fouché that started that Jewish conspiracy thing. And Fouché was Napoleon's head of secret police.
Yeah. And that changed everything.
He started out as a Jacobin, I believe.
That changed everything for Freemasonry because, the Brits officially, or the English officially started it in 1717. 3 years after King or George I became king. So let's say 17, for sake of the argument, it's not really the start of Freemasonry, but so be it. 1717,
You needed something to fight the Jesuits, right? Back in those days?
English Masonry starts, and then roughly not even 100 years later, there's this bigger and bigger conspiracy mythology about the Jewish world conspiracy. And it was always tied from the very beginning. Even the leftist, socialist, communist authors in the early 1800s, immediately they tied the Jewish conspiracy to Freemasonry, saying the Jews took over England and Masonry is all Jewish, even though it's
because the
not.
enemy was British capitalism, British imperialism.
Yeah, and so then it kind of became a conundrum to people. What is Freemasonry? Is it part of the Jewish conspiracy? And some people said yes, of course, because the basic rituals and the traditional 3 degrees, there's stuff from the Old Testament. Yeah, it's an entry point into the ancient world. It's supposed to be an acceptable or halfway acceptable sounding entry point into the ancient world, because at those times, Jews were this very small player among these large players and very professional players.
Aristocratic initiation to being part of this ruling system.
Yeah, and we saw this later with Adolf Hitler and others. They started out in the amateur level, then they went semi-pro. At first it was the Völkisch lodges that kind of copied Freemasonry and played Wagner music. So they said, okay, we're gonna take this from Freemasonry, but we don't like the Old Testament stuff because that's Jewish to us. We're gonna play Wagner music, and we're gonna kind of fumble the ancient history a bit. So we claim there was an ancient group of Armanen, kind of proto-Nazis, thousands of years ago, and we suddenly find traces everywhere of this old civilization, blah, blah, blah. So they turned the free English sort of really Scottish Masonic template, turned it into a German version of Freemasonry. And so Hitler,
they were copying.
Yeah, and so Hitler started out the amateur level. At first, he was excited about these amateur groups, and then he figured out they had no real power. Then he went semi-pro with these more successful lodges with more powerful people behind it. And then quiet. We lose the hard evidence. Suddenly, we're supposed to believe Hitler lost all interest in the occult, which is baloney. But this is like an Islamist. This is just like an Islamist person becoming pro, or a communist becoming pro, and saying, I was tamed by the system. I was young. I was a fool. I was young and dumb. I'm totally different now. But they really turned pro. And with the Russians now, I mean, at the least we can say this. There's a clear paradox right now, today, between this, the Grand Lodge, the Masonic, the Freemasonry Grand Lodge of Russia and Moscow, all these important people in a larger Masonic structure in Russia today, but at the same time they use traditional conspiracy mythology, which claims Masonry is the Jewish conspiracy. Which is it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is it? Yeah. And now it confuses the truthers. Now some truthers, they kind of don't understand it. They don't understand the paradox here, or they ignore it. But then there's some truthers that think, okay, if I go even more extreme, maybe then it makes sense. And then they claim that the Jews have control over Putin, or the Jewish conspiracy is...
Putin is Jewish. You see, there's that too, that claim.
And so they try to get
really
more extreme.
Jew to his mother. Yeah.
They try to get more extreme and more extreme. They suddenly see Jews everywhere. And if
they're
Putin,
they're in your underwear.
If Putin meets with rabbis, that's hard evidence that the Jews control them. If he meets with the Chabad group, it's evidence. If there's Masonic,
they
Masonic
believe
Grand Lodge,
that the Chabad's going to take over the world.
But
Yeah.
which is it? You cannot hold these completely contradictory beliefs at the same time. You cannot say
At the same
Putin is gonna
time,
save
yeah.
us from the Jews, and we need his help to overthrow.
At the same time, he's fighting the Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and so it goes on. It goes on a bit. It says here, Russian history is a list of famous Freemasons from Alexander Pushkin and Mikhail Kutuzov to the Tsars Peter III, Alexander I, and Paul I. Despite that heritage, it has been a favorite target for the Russian state and Orthodox Church. That is, until today. The world's oldest fraternity has been outlawed several times in Russia, and its members routinely exiled, arrested, harassed, and accused falsely of just about everything from satanic worship to global domination. Blah, blah, blah. The organization's secretive nature made it broadly suspicious in a country sometimes hostile to Western imports. Many wrongly
Oh,
presumed
sometimes.
that Freemasonry hid sinister motives during the 1991 coup attempt. During the 1991 coup attempt, which was staged, nationalist groups also spread conspiracy theories of a Masonic Jewish plot to bring down the USSR from within. The fraternity still
Oh,
has
so that's
foes.
that's who's behind Putin and Yeltsin. It was the Jewish Masonic
Oh, let him
conspiracy,
believe
right?
that. Let him believe that. Let him say that on the internet that Putin is a Jew and
Yeah,
he
they
works
do.
for the
Some of
Jews.
these crazies do say that.
Go ahead, everybody. It says the fraternity still has foes in modern Russia. In 2000, I mean, the way this opinion piece sounds suggests that the writer is a Mason himself. If he says, "Oh, the heritage and it's a fraternity," sounds like a Mason, but so be it. In 2017, nationalist politician Vitaly Milanov called for the FSB, intelligence service, to launch a criminal investigation into the Freemasons. Milanov falsely claimed that Masons were internal enemies involved in illegal political activities and taking money from foreign governments. Today, however, Freemasonry may be one of Russia's safest independent civic groups. The Grand Master of Russia's Grand Lodge, UGLR, and Andrei Bogdanov, I've heard this name before. Andrei Bogdanov claims the organization has no issues operating inside Russia. There is little to suggest he's lying. The men, mostly over 50, smoking in the Mother Lodge's cigar room near Savelyovskaya metro station, have avoided being labeled extremist, undesirable, or foreign agents. Political pressure is practically non-existent. Magic. Blah 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 blah. Now he gets a bit into the Masonic history, and they always tell it the same way. There's a preset number of sentences that you can say to the outside world if you're a Mason. It's all allowed to say specific things, but don't really say that's ancient mysteries, and it's not really what they say it is. Blah 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 goes on. So after this kind of interlude, and he's praising what the Freemasons did for Russia. Nowadays, their obscurity keeps them safe. There are an estimated 1,300 Freemasons in Russia. It's not a lot, but significant people. 1,300 Freemasons in Russia in 53 lodges, mostly middle-aged men in European Russia's biggest cities. The Mother Grand Lodge keeps an extraordinarily low public profile. The Grand Master is the only Mason permitted to talk to Russia's press, where they are seldom mentioned. The UGLR also holds just 2 public events when the public's attention is firmly distracted. Most keep their membership secret to avoid discrimination, and the Grand Master never reveals members' names. Lodges often blur members' faces on social media and leave few digital footprints.
Like the KGB doesn't know every
The
name,
yes, the
and like the
Kremlin,
KGB isn't running it, right?
right? The Kremlin
How could
also.
it not be you're going to jail or you're telling us everything? You're
Sure,
going to lose your job.
I'm gonna make an independent organization with foreign ties in Russia. Sure, you are.
Yeah, it'll be under the control of the Lubyanka. You know it will be.
The Kremlin also appreciates their non-partisanship. Discussion of politics and religion is forbidden in Masonic lodges. but they also meet outside the lodges. That's kind of the biggest joke in Masonry when they say, "Yeah, we don't talk politics, we don't talk business in the lodge." This offensive thought, of course, because the lodge is for the ritual. This is when you get the Masonic mindset and kind of this feeling for entities, really. And then outside outside of the lodge, you're supposed to use this stronger mindset and do things in a Masonic way. It's not like, this is what people always get wrong about Freemasonry. It's not about they give you the magic tricks, or it's just about simple corruption. You are expected to use the Masonic ritual energy and the mindset and apply it in the outside world through either creation or destruction. This is the real quasi-religious experience, because other people with normal religions, they have rituals and they have certain values and laws they abide by, and this is where they feel the connection. This is when they feel the spiritual connection. But in other people, they have more elaborate rituals or whatever. But with Freemasonry, you are expected to create or destroy, and this is something that most people never experience where in religious terms. Because if you go to a church, you don't destroy, or you're not busy creating some technical super gadget or figuring out military strategy, because a lot of Masons are in the military. This is not like anybody else's experience. And when you have in the outside of the lodge, when you do something spectacular, this is when the feeling really kicks in. You don't need to have one foot planted inside the lodge in that moment. You're outside of the lodge, but you're in the full Masonic experience when you create something or destroy something. Now it says here, the UGLR also claims that no politicians, high-ranking businessmen, or artists are members. The only known political figure is Bogdanov, who founded his own party and ran unsuccessfully for president in 2008. Okay, that sounds very Masonic. Oh no, we don't shape things. But we know how this works in Russia. There's always people behind politicians. There's always people behind businessmen. You don't want your name on the papers. True power means you control everything, but officially own nothing. You're not involved. You don't own this thing. This is not my mansion. It's registered to an LLC or some company structure, and I live inside of it. Oh no, I'm not a politician, but I control politicians. So this is kind of what Masons don't want to say necessarily. Blah, 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 blah. Freemasonry's public image stays clean, and the Kremlin has nothing to attack. Had someone like Alexei Navalny or even Sergei Lavrov been members, the public and state would feel differently. The Kremlin and Russia's Freemasons have reached a mutual understanding. They are happy to leave each other alone and maintain a distant, almost secret acquaintanceship. There is nothing to gain by rocking that boat. Maybe some things are best kept secret. Spoken like a true Mason. But then there's this. This is from... here, this is an opinion piece from an American newspaper. It says, the MAGA writes anti-Semitism problem. By failing to draw a clear line, J.D. Vance and the Heritage Foundation put conservatism in jeopardy. Now, recently, the Heritage Foundation, or a very important person from the Heritage Foundation, they sort of, they refused to, as they say, draw the line. And they said, well, we're not going to attack basically people like Tucker Carlson. We're not going to attack this and the other guy. We don't want to rock that boat. So no, we're not gonna infight, blah blah blah. And we know heritage is important. They've shaped political planning for quite a while. But here's the thing: how can you follow Tucker Carlson and allow him a greater influence? And if millions of voters believe what Tucker says and Alex Jones says and the others are saying, or the guests on Joe Rogan, this has an effect. Now heritage has to be very strategic. In the past, they could just say, yeah, these are the cranks. Sometimes they can be silent about the cranks because they need the voters, but then they can say again, yeah, those are crazies. We don't really like them. But now it's different. Now heritage has to say, no, we're not gonna comment on this. We're not gonna attack or criticize, Tucker Carlson. We're just not gonna do it. And that's a big issue. That's a big problem. How can you say or insinuate in any way that Russia got it right? Russia is Christian and conservative, and they have the spirit of 1776, and we lost it, and we need Russia's help to overthrow the Jew government we have here, and then we can be just like Russia, and all is going to be great. The Russians help us. The Russians help us against the Zionist Masonic conspiracy. But then it's like, yeah, the Kremlin actually likes the Masons, the Grand Lodge and big tradition in Russia, and there's no issue if you're one of those super high-ranking Masons in Russia. And Masonry, also over there in Russia, Masonry is just Freemasonry for the most part, is a big entry point. There's more. There's more occultism in Russia. And usually that super professional occultism doesn't have an official name. There's no members that have opinion pieces and say, yeah, we've been around for a while. Yeah, we're cool. Don't fear us. We basically don't give out any meaningful information, but just trust us. There's no name that people recognize. There's no number. Oh, it's 1,300 people. It's 50-something lodges, and there's a mother lodge, and blah, blah, blah. Silence. Absolute silence. And it's a meticulous puzzle to solve if you want to figure out what those higher levels are and how the KGB has been cultivating this for a while making these Masonic things illegal in the Soviet era. This is very important to understand.
And basically manipulating them through their own, the Golovin Circle and others, I think, were KGB projects.
Yeah, initially, the communist movement. This is also something that people don't really remember. Initially, before the revolution in Russia and during, the communists used a lot of occultism. We saw the traces with Karl Marx earlier. We saw traces with Lenin and Proudhon and others and many people. They used occultism on a lower grade for the masses and said Christianity is stupid, let's destroy it, we're gonna build our own paradise here. They used occultism to get the revolution, but once they had the revolution, they made occultism for the masses more or less illegal. There was still stuff going on in the forests in Russia because that's like a 1,000+ year tradition. They still have, low level occultism.
A lot of shamanism and mysticism in Russia. Yeah.
But organized groups were illegal in Soviet times. You could not say, I'm going to, have my own Masonic lodge, or I'm going to make a lodge and have members and have, satellites and blah, blah, blah. That was illegal. It was only allowed to have communist organizations.
If somebody was found to have special talents like Yuri Geller, they were recruited and brought to the Lubyanka for testing.
They had this thing when they said internally, especially with the KGB, internally, we're going to have professional occultism, and it's super quiet. I mean, you could see the mausoleum of Lenin, an ancient structure, or a copy of an ancient structure they built as the grave of Lenin. If you know what to look for, you get it. But otherwise, they said the professional occultism is for, the inner circle of the KGB and party and some of the military. We're super quiet about it. Has no official name. Even if somebody hears something about it, they cannot name it. There's no name, place, nothing specific because they're so fluid about it. And for the general population, we don't allow them, semi-pro or more amateurish organized occultism other than the countryside, because we can't control that because it's too expensive. That's what the Nazis did. That's when they used occultism They used occultism on a broad level, on a broad scale, to get the revolution, the Nazi revolution. Hate Christianity. Christianity's stupid. We need to go back to the old stuff. And making specific
Well, they were
things.
also trying to change Christianity
Yeah,
by making
yeah,
positive
yeah.
Christianity, right? They're
Changing
gonna change that.
Christianity, stealing Christianity, parts of it, stealing British Masonry,
Hijacking it, yeah. Yeah.
hijacking British Masonry, playing Wagner music. They used that on a broad scale to get the revolution, but once they had it, they made all these occult groups for the general population illegal, and only the Nazi, the inner circles of the Nazis was allowed to practice professional occultism and be super quiet about it. So there's a pattern to it, and it's like,
And
when do
this
we
is at
get?
the same time you had, more recent biography of Julius Evola, and people can get that on Amazon. This is a very interesting thing. In his biography, he was hired by the SS, by Himmler, to be part of a project that had been going on in Italy to get a comprehensive, um, I guess, research library, or intelligence library of tracking every single occult organization, front group, front company, person who was involved in lodges, in the occult, and to have basically to centralize all the information about these groups so that you could literally, open a file drawer, pull out a file, and you could see anyone involved with the lodges or the occult masonry in Europe. And this was assembled. It took many years in Italy when the American forces were advancing on Rome. Julius Evola left Rome, and they moved the archive to Vienna. And in 1945, the Soviet army took Vienna, captured that archive. And of course, this is when you go to Heiser's biography of Dugin, it's implied that this archive is what Golovin and Dugin had access to, and what their whole project, KGB project, was to create out of this, that again, mimicking, copying from the Masons and the occult lodges in order to penetrate them, take them over, just the same way the Russians created mafias, the Russian mafia, to become the Lord Mafia. They make Russia the capital of international organized crime, as the head of the Italian Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry into the Mafia said to David Remnick in his book Lenin's Tomb. They were also going to make the Lodge of Lodges, and they were going to take over the occult world at the same time. I think it's the same basic blueprint for taking over international organized crime is taking over the occult, the world of the occult. I think
Yeah,
it's
I
the
mean,
same.
God, the Italian mafia and their Roman style occultism, and of course Russian mafia in the West, and all these groups. Sometimes they even use the old Roman terms when they have their organizational structure, and they have very rigid, sometimes rules that seem like nonsensical to people, but it makes sense in an occult way. So there's so much super interesting, super important stuff that you can put out there in the public. And you could, if you put it out there and you have a bigger audience already, you can be hailed as a hero. You can actually shape things in a good way, and people are gonna pat you on the back and send you money. But strangely, there's these powerful influencers now that don't use this opportunity. Maybe they're just too dumb, amateurish, uneducated, but still, they don't use the good opportunities, but they spend their time on literally anything else they can, attack and drag up from mythology,
Well, it's
or a silly
easier
mythology.
to use a myth of the conspiracy. It's easier to use conspiracy theory narratives than it is to do real research into what really goes on.
Yeah, and it says here, Tucker Carlson's recent hosting of Mr. Fuentes on his podcast, which aired
Oh my goodness, yes.
October 27th, was a watershed in the campaign to make racism cool again. This is from an opinion piece, of course. Mr. Carlson has come a long way since the bow-tied folly of his neoconservative youth. After leaving Fox News in 2023, he went over the edge. Reinvented himself as the
Nick
second.
Fuentes is
Yeah,
so toxic, isn't he?
such a weirdo. He reinvented himself as the second coming of Alex Jones, Carlson has interviewed a podcaster who thinks Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II, raised discredited claims that Ashkenazi Jews are immune to COVID, and claimed that Benjamin Netanyahu openly tells Israelis, I control the United States, I control Donald Trump. There's always a market for the circus, but Mr. Carlson has become one of the freaks. And he normalized his guest with the gentlest of questioning, nodding along as Mr. Fuentes said the country can't be held together unless organized Jewry in America is defeated. Now, if people don't know Mr. Fuentes, he's like this younger guy who seems like he has some serious case of ADHD. He's very uppity and very hopped up, and I talked about this. There's only, like, for the most part, there's only 3 types of influencers. The guy who plays the super smart person, super educated genius, even though most of the times they're not real geniuses. Then there's the folk hero. I'm a commoner. I don't claim to be super smart, but I have a lot of heart and courage. I found the courage. I'm a normal guy. I want to be celebrated, but I'm one of the people. And then there's the type of the I'm too cool for everything. This is like the Joe Rogan type or Fuentes. They're very laughy and jokey and they always act like they have a cool, funny distance to everything. So they can always deflect and say, "Oh, you're taking it too seriously," or "I'm cooler because I'm having more fun than you." And but when you talk about defeating organized Jewry, and this is like it's we've heard this
Oh
before.
my
I mean,
gosh.
the Germans
Oh
heard
my
this
God.
before, and it wasn't funny then, and it's not funny now. And I don't think organized Jewry thinks it's funny now. Blah blah blah.
They killed a
He
lot
de-
of people in the
he
1930s and
denies
40s with that stuff.
He denies the facts of the Holocaust, opposes interracial marriage, seeks total Aryan victory, and urges the rule of a Catholic Taliban. He calls for the death penalty for an occult element at the high levels of society, specifically among the Jews, that is suppressing Christianity, and on and on and on. And they also go into, I think they talk about Steve Bannon. His acolyte, Kurt Mills, boasts of being a hater of Israel and says Israel is wagging the dog of American politics. Mrs. Owens, I think you mean Candace Owens, wonders if Israel was involved in Charlie Kirk's murder. Mr. Carlson calls Christian support for Israel a brain virus and heresy and says Vladimir Putin is the most popular leader in the world. But Freemasonry is cool in Russia. They have some serious occultism in Russia, even though they don't broadcast it. And it's like, oh, I haven't heard about it, so it doesn't exist. That's not how things are. If you haven't heard about it, you can make any, these people, they can make any educated guess or not, whether it exists or not. Uh,
Uneducated guesses.
blah 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 blah, and it's like, then they get into the lame response from the current Trump administration and the Heritage Foundation. So far, the haters are winning. On October 30th, Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation, backed Mr. Carlson as Heritage's close friend. Mr. Roberts condemned Mr. Fuentes' opinions and anti-Semitism, but he also attacked the globalist class and venomous coalition serving someone else's agenda for sowing division and attacking our friends on the right. So he does draw a line when it comes to Fuentes, but Carlson can just, as I said, nod along, not be too open about it, la 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 la. I mean, yeah, maybe Carlson is bought and sold. Maybe he's
Yeah,
just
why
dumb.
do
Maybe
you
he needs the money.
give time to this toxic freak?
But
I
I
mean,
mean,
the
there's
guy
also
in the
something with
article.
some of these characters. I mean, with some of these characters, maybe there's a game involved, because we've seen this with some of these influential British types. I mean, was it the owner of this British newspaper? The what is it called? I have it here because it still exists. The Daily Mail. This used to be the paper from the Lords Rothermere, and it was either one of the Lords Rothermere or the manager of the paper that started in the 30s he started to publish things and speak for himself and allude to a Jewish Masonic world conspiracy. This was at a time when that big deception was going on, pretending to be somewhat compatible with the Nazis, but this was a ploy. And I think the Lord Rothermere, or his guy running the paper, they also had a German British princess that they were using. Was it Stephanie von Hohenlohe, one of those princesses? And they used her as an intermediary with the Germans, and historians can't quite decide whether she was spying for one side or influencing for one side or the other. But this is like, yeah, with some people, I could potentially imagine a game being played, but with Tucker, that kind of game, I don't think so. It's more like a mix of, I need the money, I want the power. Maybe there's something to it, and positive thinking. Maybe the Russians will save us from this conspiracy, and maybe he had some. Maybe this happens with prominent people. They have a legal dispute, and Carlson had some legal disputes tied with his time at Fox News, because he was saying one thing in public while truly saying something else behind the scenes. He does play games, but when you have a legal dispute and the opposing side has a Jewish lawyer or a Jewish law firm, that can oftentimes fan the flames of somebody's conspiracy beliefs. That happened with Kanye West, famous artist, and happened to others. They hear these things, then they have some, a legal dispute, and the other side it's a Jewish lawyer, and boom, there you go. They're on. They believe it now because
The
of a Jewish
radical
lawyer.
stupidity, the radical stupidity of the rabble, the radical stupidity of the rabble in modern mass society, and you've got mass formation, where you have mass media that can communicate these very simple messages. You remember the formula in Mein Kampf, that you make it simple so that the lowest mentality can understand it. You just keep repeating it, and people will believe it. It doesn't matter if it's not true. You just repeat it over mass media over and over and over again, and then these knuckleheads, they will start spitting it back up to you again. And this radical stupidity, this book, I really recommend this book to understand this. Hitler and the Germans, it's Eric Voegelin's lectures in the 1960s about the way to analyze this phenomenon. And of course, he's picking Nazism because he's German, and he's giving these lectures in Munich. And he's saying stupidity, which we have adduced. Stupidity shall mean here that a man, because of his loss of reality, that is, you're believing things that aren't true, you're disconnected from real reality, is not in a position to rightly orient his action in the world in which he lives. Well, if you've got an organization with active measures like the KGB, they can orient you by using these narratives that people naturally fall for, that are already have been floating around for a couple hundred years, as you pointed out, this Jewish Masonic conspiracy narrative. And of course, it's aimed at the British originally, or at the Western Anglo-American establishment, the West. Remember, America's controlled by Jews, they will tell you, Nick Fuentes will say. And organized Jewry is the center of this, and it's the Masons, and this whole conspiracy theorizing, which is, it's stupid and it's not reality, but you can make this people believe in it, and then you can guide them, so when the central organ for guiding the action of these stupid people, it has no openness towards reason and spirit, that is deeper sense of truth. Um, it, 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 Everything in society that's supposed to orient people properly to right and wrong, good and evil, it's broken. It just breaks down. And there's a certain violence in someone like Fuentes. And when you take this libertarian ideology that's sort of reflected in Heinlein's Starship Troopers, and I think his points about corporal punishment are good, but what does Heinlein say about authority? It comes from violence. Well, this is why people say, oh, Heinlein's a fascist. Well, no, that's not where authority comes from, right? Authority comes from, well, as Eric Berglund would say, orientation towards the divine ground, reason and and that connection to God that you have inside, that knowledge of right and wrong that is given to each human being. That's what it should be. But that once you have connected that, severed, there's no reasoning with these people, and they don't really have that light inside themselves. This is how you get the Holocaust. This is how you get this insanity, this mass insanity. You have people on the right who are professing Christians who believe Putin's a Christian and that the invasion of Ukraine is right because Ukraine's the most corrupt country in the world, and that we should side with Russia and go against our allies in Europe. I mean, this is such madness. And this is Tucker Carlson is a spokesman for this. Nick Fuentes is a spokesman for this. You got Michael Anthony at the State Department. You've got, Nick Land and the Dugan influenced Dark Enlightenment people. This is evil, all right? It may not be exactly Nazism, but it's the same disconnection from reason and spirit.
When I wrote one of my books, this was part of a series on the superpowers, and this focused on religions and empires. And obviously, I had to get into the ancient world and sort of the origins of the mystery cults, and I tried to tie this into the modern era, where we see traces of ancient mystery cults, quite a few of them. And it's like it's been this topic in conspiracy media, and it's now out of the fringe. It's now mainstream to talk about satanic, or again in the mainstream. It was mainstream, a long time ago, but now it's like they talk about satanic groups and satanic rituals, and as if Jewish people invented mystery cults or the occult template or whatever, and nobody else had any real connection to it, right? And so it's so
and it's a very
so
complicated subject.
And there
was
was
very complicated,
and there were some of these books that came out, conspiracy books. There was Transformation of America by, I think it was Kathy O'Brien, and lots of books like it, and
The Shadows of Power.
And it's this thing when people that are already influencers, they read some of that stuff, and they're so fascinated by it and the power it gives you because the audience is listening, especially a Christian audience. They start to copy and paste. And then they add something to it, and they copy and paste. And now they claim to be an expert on occultism or Satanism. And then there's the next guy that reads their stuff and copies that. Now Candace Owens, the cycle keeps repeating. Candace Owens is posting stuff about the OTO and the Satanists and blah blah blah. Now she claims to be an expert. Where does she get her stuff? Of course, the internet. And some of the old books. And there was then there was a German book that came out, and it was celebrated in the conspiracy circles. And somebody asked me, politely, somebody I knew asked me my opinion of it, my professional opinion. Not in public. Not in public. This was supposed to be like, I'm giving just my feedback. And so I actually got the copy of this German book. Again, I'm the expert, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I read this book, and I make notes, and I look up I check the footnotes. And so basically, there was like this very primitive, rudimentary understanding of occultism. And every time the author went into specifics. Okay, what do they actually do, and who's doing it, and how do they do it? Every time it gets into specifics, he was falling back on sources that came back as Kathy O'Brien's book Transformation of America, Fritz Springmeier's book on the supposed MK monarch satanic programming stuff. And so every time there's this temptation to present the audience and inside what happens inside satanic high level activity. How does it look like? What does it feel like? Who's involved in it? But every time for I don't know how many hundreds of years, every time somebody claims something very, very specific, there's no hard sources. No matter how far you go back. Okay, you look up this guy's source, not a real source, or he's referring to another source, and then you lose track. Now, as I said, some people, they go pro. They turn from a semi-professional into a pro, and then they go quiet in terms of public traces. That's a thing. But you cannot just make up things. You cannot specifically say, "Oh, these bloodlines are the leaders of the Illuminati, and they do rituals that are exactly like this." And in this Transformation of America book, they make specific accusations. This specific politician has abused me in a ritual manner. And you read that book and you think, man, this person that claims to have gone through all these things, that's the biggest martyr in human history, supposedly. I mean, Jesus has nothing on that person if that person's telling the truth. So that person's not telling the truth. Because it's so much. It's like constant and nonstop and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like they're competing with each other, these authors. Nobody can outdo me. I have the biggest, I'm the biggest martyr that's ever lived. And so they max it out. They go as far as they possibly can. And everybody in their family was, of course, a Satanist too. And everybody's a Satanist. There was no normal person they've ever met in their entire lives. But somehow they got out and get to tell this very specific story. So that's what drives people crazy. They somehow feel there's some very organized, very, very dark circles that, and we see what they do. We see what the Russians do. And when they do that in public, in Ukraine or elsewhere, or to their own people, when that's their day job, when that's their Monday through Friday day job, guess what they do in their private time? So there's that. So we know something really dark and organized is going on, but we have to be really careful when you get into specifics, like saying, "Oh, it's Jewish," or "It's that guy or that guy, and he's doing this and doing that."
Right.
Because
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
pros, professionals, they go dark, or you're actually born into a very old family, and you get introduced into this. So you never go through the amateur phase. You don't tell everybody in public, "I'm a Freemason," or "I'm in this other lodge and I play around with this." And absolute pros are very, very silent, so it's super hard to track them. And that's why we have to be really, really careful when these multi-million audience
There's a clown
influencers
level and
make specific claims. How do we know? I mean, by those measured by those standards, how do we know Tucker Carlson isn't a high-ranking Satanist? How do we know Fuentes is not a high-ranking Satanist? Anybody can accuse anybody with no real evidence. But we can say Tucker Carlson is giving a free pass to the Russian regime, and boy, their day jobs are really, really grim. They do some really, really grim stuff, and they have really lame excuses. And I understand security is not easy. You're responsible for a republic, an empire, whatever. It's not pretty, but you can't give the Russians a pass like this, and you cannot throw around these terms like Satanism and "I'm fighting the dark forces, I'm the shining knight in the shining armor, battling the devil and the demons," when you don't know that guy from the other guy or this from the other thing. It's so easy.
Well, when you are supporting murderers, and there's no other way to call the Russian regime, the Kremlin regime, they are a pack of murderers. Criminals who are routinely murdering Ukrainian civilians. They've invaded a sovereign country. They've broken into international law. They lie. They're infiltrating all these countries. They're working with the Chinese, the Chinese regime has massive murderous intentions towards the American people and the West. And, you just look at the COVID thing they unleashed on the world in 2020. And people say, "Oh, no, they didn't unleash that." Look, there's this huge history of mass murder. In China and Russia, these are the people who inherited the regime of Mao and Stalin, the two biggest mass murderers in history. They inherited the regimes. There is no real break with the past. They're putting up statues of Stalin in Russia. They're putting up statues of Mao in China. Xi Jinping, Mao is one of his heroes. He wants to bring back Mao's little red book. He tried to do one of his own. Is too mediocre to make one that's any good. But these regimes are murderous. I mean, all governments are dangerous. They all do bad things. They're all militaries commit atrocities. But there's a qualitative
Oh
difference
yeah.
between this Russian regime, this Chinese regime, and the West. A real qualitative difference that we you can't ignore. It is all in the fine. The devil's in the details. It's in the. We have to have a more nuanced, more honest approach to all these issues, and this is where the conspiracy theory and the clown level analysis, the conspiracy theory, the Russell, the Nick Fuentes and the Alex Joneses and the Tucker Carlsons, look, they have a pretense because they have such a polished video presentation. Their minds are full of cobwebs and rot and nonsense. And in spreading that nonsense, they're helping the Russians. They're helping the Chinese. They're spreading confusion and disorientation in a public that we no longer have institutions, you realize, in Germany, in the United States in particular, where the people really have that old trust they used to have in their leaders. And so
Yeah.
they can be led, because of this distrust, they can be led in all kinds of dangerous directions. And the old liberal establishment and the people, bless their hearts, the people on the left of center and right of center, conservatives and liberals, who simply they're not, they have lost that fine-tuned, nuanced understandings, and they're not doing their homework enough to say, wait a minute, traditional conservatism and liberalism, they're ideologies. You've lost touch with reality, and therefore people aren't believing you anymore, but they're
Yeah.
going to these crazy ideas, these really crazy ideas, and it's just destroying us
Yeah, and it's
intellectually from within.
observably is stuff that's been thrown around now in front of huge audiences, big names and everything. These ideas are Nazi ideas. There's no way around it. You can beat around the bush and
Yeah,
and
that's
and
right.
come up with mental gymnastics, but this was the Nazi program. It's also the radical Muslim program. They believe the exact
Yep.
same conspiracy mythology. So how can
Fighting
you ever?
organized Jewry. You're going to hear
So
those same words
how
out of
can
a
you?
Nazi or as an
Yeah. So
Islamist.
how can you present yourself as especially brave and special and blah 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 if close to, what is it now, 1.7 billion Muslims, 2 billion Muslims, I don't even know anymore, if that many Muslims believe the exact same stuff. The Jews took over Britain and the US, and it's the satanic core of everything. You believe the same as a run-of-the-mill Nazi. You believe the same as a run-of-the-mill Islamist.
Or
Congratulations.
or the Eurasianists that are hijacking parts of the anti-Semitic movement to oppose Israel and to promote Islam
Yeah, it's
under
like,
under the Eurasianist
have they
ecumenism
once
that they
yeah, have they once by themselves, with help of actual literature and physical evidence, have they actually tracked the legends? Have they tracked, is it true that the old Rothschilds stole so much money from the mighty House of Hessen? Did that actually happen? What's the source? What is the source material for that? Oh, they
you'd
didn't
think
look.
the House of Hessen
And
would put a stop to that back in
that
the old day, right?
a 20-year
It's
vetting
completely
process.
ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
the Oppenheimer family, which is like a larger cluster, Jewish German kind of cluster. The Oppenheimers and other families, they were used to the age-old court Jew phenomenon, where the established aristocracies, they would recruit a small number of Jews for specific jobs. So the Oppenheimers, I think it was one of the Oppenheims, he was already in that position. He was a court Jew, or a Hoffaktor, as they called it. And he basically told Maya Amschel Rothschild, this is the way to go. This is the only way out of the ghetto. This is the only way to have some protection for your family, because when you're forced into that ghetto, fire can break out, which happened all the time. Disease breaks out. It's the only chance you have to, protect yourself and your family and maybe your wider community over there. Your biggest shot is to become a court Jew, a Hoffaktor. So they told him how to do it, and so Rothschild, as the Anglos would pronounce it, Rothschild tried to make that happen, and it took him 20 years. There was a 20-year roundabout vetting process where he bought certain precious metals and sold them at a loss to the Landgraf of Hessen, trying to get into his good books, getting a connection started. But this was a very long, very meticulous vetting process, because the House of Hessen already had a couple of Jews working for them. This was not a new phenomenon. So there was another Jew that had no status. Another Jew was applying for that job, for such a role. And the House of Hessen took its time, said, okay, maybe in 20 years, maybe if you're 100% loyal, if you don't screw with us, and we test you in ways you may not even conceive, and if this all passes, maybe one day you actually get to work for me. And that finally happened. Rothschild protected some of the crates with valuable items, protected that stuff from Napoleon's forces. So Rothschild proved to be a loyal trooper, a loyal asset. And that's when the House of Hessen upgraded, the House of Hessen then upgraded Rothschild's role. Then the sons were sent to, Britain and France. And so this was like a slow-moving process of cultivating those workers, basically. And then of course the further legends, after the Battle of Waterloo, one of the Rothschilds.
Oh, that's a famous
One of the
fake.
Rothschilds scamming the British stock market. I mean, if somebody actually had scammed or tricked the British or the London Stock Exchange, this person would have been arrested. This person would have committed a great sin against the
They would have
mighty
hanged
British.
him.
Against
They
the
would have
mighty
hanged him.
British Empire. Everybody knew where the Rothschilds were living, how to grab them, how to arrest them. The legal system was well equipped for that. And also there would have been a tremendous amount of actual physical evidence. A lot of established people losing money, losing the stocks, losing them to Rothschild, blah 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 blah. And then you would have to look deeper and deeper and deeper to figure out who actually controlled whom, what actually happened. Did all those conspiracy authors for hundreds of years actually do that job and figure out if those legends are true? They did not do that. They just copied and pasted and said, oh, nowadays there's a big bank with a Jewish supposed owner, or there's some Jews in government and blah, blah, blah. But as I said, the true masters, true power, they control everything, but they own nothing in public. You don't really see them much in public, or they don't have a large profile, or it's a conundrum who actually owns the stuff. Nobody's really supposed to know. So then if you see some prominent Jews, and they were basically allowed or instructed more or less to build some prolific structures like Mentmore or Le Ferrière. You may have seen some of these structures in movies. I think Kubrick used one of those old palaces for Eyes Wide Shut, for an exterior shot of the mansion.
Right.
But this was supposed to be in the public. They had parties there with the high society, and there were photos in the press, and everybody knew if you were an influential Italian or French or German, blah, 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 you went to these parties. This was the high society. This is not how actual leaders would play it, especially not a Jewish conspiracy. If there was ever, if Jews had a real empire for a long time, if there actually had been a tremendous power force Jewish empire, and if they had all this great, opportunities and espionage, then you may actually could bother to look into some sort of a Jewish, large espionage program. But this would just be one of many espionage programs. But there was no such large empire, and then and even then, if there had been such an empire, if there had been a larger successful espionage campaign by Jews, you wouldn't see those Jews. If they had a big program, if they were running people in foreign countries, and if they were doing all these things, you would never in a million years do it like this. You would not put Rothschilds that came from the small ghetto in Germany. You would not put them up front and center. You would not, for the love of God, would not make a Jew temporarily the bookkeeper for a central bank run by a real empire, and put them out there, doing the everyday work at a central bank or a merchant bank. You would never actually do it like this. This goes against every basic understanding of how espionage works, of how you cover your front organizations, you cover your tracks. This would be the dumbest, most amateurish intelligence operation to do it like that. But this is what the conspiracy guys are saying. It was done so dumb and so blatantly, and they had almost magic powers. It was so dumb but so successful. So the dumbest application of espionage principles, the worst performance, got the best results. Ladies and gentlemen, no.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Alex. We're headed into 3 hours. I want to thank the audience. This has been a fascinating journey into some of the thinking behind, the way conspiracy theory and anti-Semitism has basically crept into discourse to where we're like the 1920s or 30s in Weimar. We're having the same kind of, this is like deja vu all over again, like in Monty Python, where we're saying like, wait a minute, it's sort of like there's not a Hitler figure yet, but this stuff is swirling around, and I think the Russians are using it. Wherever you see the anti-Ukrainian narrative, you're seeing these anti-Jewish narratives sort of running in parallel with them, and I think it's something it's fascinating to watch. And people like Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, Steven Seagal. Now, I mean, they were recently photographed together in Russia, having the high life, enjoying the goodies. Look, we've got a problem, and people are not discussing it intelligently. They're not having a nuanced enough discussion. It's not what the liberals are saying against the right and MAGA. There's a lot of true things, but they don't have the nuance. They want open borders, and they want Islam. They want to protect Islam within the West, and then MAGA's against that. But MAGA's got its own problems. These MAGA. I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and let's join with Russia and split Russia from China. I mean, we're screwed coming from the left or the right. And so I want to thank you, Alex, and I want to thank the audience for bearing with us. It's a very important discussion, and I hope you'll join us next week for another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist in the U.S., and my co-host has been Alex Benesch in Germany.